If you thought the Packers were good before, wait till you see what they look like when Brian Gutekunst isn't lighting first-round picks on fire. Welcome in, everybody, to the reveal of the number 11 team in my power rankings as we head into the start of the 2025 NFL season. Today, we take a deep dive into the Green Bay Packers. This team headed into last year with pretty major expectations, but they ended up enduring quite the roller coaster of a season. They begin week one in Brazil, not just with a loss against the eventual Super Bowl champion Eagles, but at the time what felt like could have been the loss of their season before they ever got to play a game in the U.S., with Jordan Love suffering what at the time was feared to be a season-ending ACL injury. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. They stomach a few games with Malik Willis, and then Jordan Love was able to slowly but surely build that knee back up, and by mid to late season, the Packers were really humming and looking like a legitimate playoff contender. Unfortunately, as the season went on, they showed that they maybe did lack some of the star talent to beat the actual Super Bowl contenders in the NFC. And it also didn't help that the wheels really fell off with injuries down the stretch, and their season was bookended with a loss against the Eagles in a game where they were down to their fourth wide receiver and eighth offensive lineman, and it just wasn't meant to be by season's end. But as the NFL offseason offers most teams, hope rings true for this Packers team that looks to head into this season fresh, healthy, and very young still, by the way. This Packers team is the youngest roster in the NFL, so a lot to talk about here today. If this Packers team can really get things right and maybe raise the bar a little bit and put themselves in a position to really compete against the top dogs in the NFC, and maybe even go on a bit of a Super Bowl run here. But before we do get started, if you could take just a second to hit that like button down below, it really does help support my series. It tells YouTube that you enjoyed the video and to push it out to other Packers fans and NFL diehards just like you. And make sure you subscribe. We are approaching the top 10 in this series. You're not going to want to miss the remaining teams in this countdown to my number one team in these rankings. But let's get started. In this series, as we go chapter by chapter, we begin each portion of this football team by taking a look at this team's offseason and asking whether they got better, worse, or stayed the same, whether that's the coaching staff or each individual position group. And we begin by looking at the coaching staff. And the Packers don't have any substantial changes here, but they did lose their linebackers coach, Anthony Campanelli, to become the defensive coordinator with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So that is at least a moderate loss, and then the Packers, as they like to do, are going to be promoting from within with Sean Dugan. So with a changing in just a position coach, it's not enough for me to say the coaching overall is downgraded, but that is a noteworthy swap for this team. But let's talk first and foremost about this Packers coaching staff and what this team looks like schematically on both sides of the ball. And realistically, this coaching staff, along with the Packers' really legacy of establishing a winning culture in Green Bay, where you have to love football if you're going to play football in Green Bay, Wisconsin. But this is a huge part of the Packers' success, with Matt Lafleur at the helm, who I do rank as the 6th overall head coach in the NFL. What a slam dunk hire he has been from the get-go here. Going from Mike McCarthy to him has been the biggest of upgrades for this team. And in fact, Matt Lafleur has currently the highest winning percentage in NFL history. His record as a head coach right now is 40-11 since he took over here. That is crazy. And at the beginning, you could point to having Aaron Rodgers as a core part of that success. Granted, Lafleur was a big part in getting Rodgers to play well again, as the couple years before that he had shown some of the flashes of the Aaron Rodgers we've maybe seen last year, for example, with the Jets. But now, especially moving on from Rodgers, 2 years with Jordan Love, and even in a couple games where he was scheming up wins with Malik Willis out there, we have seen Matt Lafleur really get to shine as truly one of the best offensive coaches in the league, whether that's from a play design standpoint or just a play calling standpoint, knowing what buttons to push at the right time. but his play designs especially have really stood out. Yes, in the passing game where he's really good at predicting coverages and using the right, play action attacks and scheming guys open deep down the field, underneath, really good with pre-snap motion to help his receivers create separation and easier first reads on a guy like Jordan Love. But honestly, in the last couple of years too, this run game has blown me away under Matt Lafleur. You can point to him as one of the most creative run game designers in the league. They have an excellent balance of gap, counter, outside zone, inside zone, duo, toss, you name it. They will throw the whole kitchen sink at you, and that he's really good at making one run look one way and mixing things up where you think the same thing's coming, but they're running it back the other way on a reverse or a counter. It's really all come together here in Green Bay. The results speak for themselves, and it's absolutely worth shouting out as well that despite only having Malik Willis in the building for about 2 weeks, they traded for him at the back end of the preseason. And when Jordan Love went down, they went 2-0 under Malik Willis. And you watch those games, some of the plays that Lafleur was dialing up, creating explosive plays, not just on the ground where it was really impressive to get a Malik Willis and the QB run game involved, but some of the different wide open looks that created explosive pass plays for Malik Willis were really impressive too. So that was just another big accomplishment for Matt Lafleur. And I think you can make a strong argument that he is the biggest asset that this Packers team has right now towards winning football games. And that's reflected in all of these rankings related to him as the head coach here. So the overall coaching culture is very, very good. They rank 6th to 12th with an A- grade there. That is our sort of benefit of the doubt slider, but an assessment of the team's culture. Does this team know how to win? Is there a consistent plan to establish team identity towards winning football games? That has very much been here in Green Bay. But the offensive coach rankings as well, very high rankings here. 5th to 8th for pass game coaching and 3rd to 7th for run game coaching. A- grades across the board. Rankings that really stop short only of other coaches that have just had better ultimate playoff success than Lafleur. But not to end on a negative note with him, he's phenomenal. You also have Adam Stenavich here as the offensive coordinator. This was a really smart promotion for the Packers because Adam Stenavich is really their offensive line coach. We know Matt Lafleur is the offensive guru, scheme lord here. But really going back to when the Bears were looking for an offensive coordinator in Matt LaFleur's coaching tree, it was either going to be Luke Getsy or Adam Stenavich, and the Packers had to make a choice between those two guys. They chose to keep their O-line mastermind in Adam Stenavich, and that proved to be the right decision because Luke Getsy, after stints with the Bears and the Raiders, is now back as an assistant coach in Green Bay. But we also see maybe a rising trend, maybe started by the Cowboys here, of the idea that you might poach a team's offensive line coach to be your offensive coordinator, as they did with Travis Adams in Dallas. If you're going to have an offensive-minded head coach, why not use that basically availability to promote someone else's O-line coach to be your offensive coordinator, because you can only hire up inside the NFL. So now, unless someone wants to make Adam Stenavich their head coach, they can't really steal him from Green Bay unless the Packers allow him to leave. But he is a huge asset for Green Bay. The Packers have been at the pinnacle of O-line development for a long time, outside of maybe Philadelphia with Jeff Stoutland. You can make a case the Packers are second to maybe even first in terms of developing O-line talent, because the Packers do it with like second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh round picks all the time. It's a big reason why I don't understand why this team gave Aaron Banks $19 million, but we'll get there. Now, as far as the scheme itself is concerned here, I think we hinted at it a good bit earlier on, but LaFleur comes from that Shanahan background, so it's the same approach with that play-action heavy attack on earlier downs. LaFleur certainly not afraid to get into 12 personnel and some heavier looks, but it is that idea of marrying the run and pass via play-action, have a diverse run game that opposing defenses have to respect, and then have that dangerous play action passing attack where you're able to suck in linebackers, have the quarterback fake that handoff, flip that head around, and you've got crossing routes, corner routes, deep posts appearing wide open for the QB as he turns that head around. So very similar concepts, but he has certainly added his own creativity, Matt Lafleur has, to this offense. And I think he's as good as any coach in the league at, getting in the lab and coming up with things himself. But also, I know for a fact, after listening to Jordan Rodriguez's podcast series, The Play Callers, Matt Lafleur talks about how he's kind of in the lab, like looking at what Mike McDaniel's doing and what McVay and Shanahan are doing. And for example, I think Lafleur was one of the first coaches to really quickly implement that little cheat motion that the Dolphins were doing with Tyreek Hill, where you're doing that quick, almost Canadian Football League-esque pre-snap motion. You do see a lot of times, like you'll see the Niners do something or the Dolphins do something or anybody will do something new and creative, and the Packers are often the first team to bring that to the table before the rest of the league kind of figures out whatever that thing is and how to stop it. So really at the forefront of innovation and high-end offensive play calling here in Green Bay, and it's a ton of fun to watch. Now, what also was a ton of fun to watch was Jeff Hafley coming in for this Packers defense, and finally, for the first time in, 12, 13 years, really since the Packers won the Super Bowl, because Dom Capers felt like he really regressed after that in Green Bay as the defensive coordinator. This was the first time it felt like the Packers had a good defensive coach in control here. And the proof was in the pudding here as well. While it took a little bit of time for them to really figure out what they wanted to do with this personnel, and their defenses had some struggles early on, 34 points in that loss against the Eagles. Week 4, they gave up 31 against the Vikings. But it didn't take long for this defense to really start clicking. And when you look back on it at the end of the season, the Packers were top 10 in both run defense and pass defense DVOA. 7th against the run, 9th against the pass. And it's not that that metric is the end-all be-all to say that this was for sure a top 10 defense, but it is a good metric put together by Aaron Schatz and his team over there at the FTN network. It's just a good way to kind of reflect back on what the numbers say about how the defense performed. So that was really a pleasant surprise for Green Bay. It was the critical reason why they were able to kind of continue winning football games as Jordan Love wasn't even on the field or his old self to begin his comeback from that knee injury. And I think you can honestly say that of all the things that didn't necessarily go right for this Packers team last year, one of the big things heading into the year was like, can they get this defensive coordinator hire right with Jeff Hafley in his first season in Green Bay last year? And that's the biggest thing I think you can take away from last year that makes the Packers a little bit more dangerous is like, okay, this defense is now set up to actually take advantage of having a bunch of first-round talent on that side of the ball, being one of, if not the youngest defenses in the league, to actually develop and get even better here in year 2 of Jeff Hafley's defense, where this defense did actually end the season giving the Eagles offense the biggest run for their money in those playoffs. They held the Eagles to 22 points, and that was including an opening kickoff return fumble by the Packers special teams that set the Eagles up for a quick touchdown right off the heels of that turnover inside the 20, really. So certainly a lot of optimism with Jeff Hafley here, and I definitely think if he continues to have results here, Hafley might be a name that gets thrown into the head coach candidate conversation, someone that does actually have head coach experience. He came over from running the Boston College program years before he arrived here. But as far as the coach rankings there go, he has very respectable rankings, as you would think coming out of that, though still room to climb. He gets B grades across the board, which ranks as high as 13th for pass defense coaching and as high as 14th for run defense coaching. Really in that middle cluster in both phases that ranges from roughly from about 13th to 22nd. There's a lot of good defensive coaches in the league today. Now, as far as what Hafley's scheme looks like here in Green Bay, It's very much in that Robert Saleh, even D'Amico Ryan's family of defenses. Jeff Hafley did coach under Robert Saleh in San Francisco 2017, 2018. But that's not the only influence there. He does go back to working with Mike Pettin in Cleveland, who was well known for his blitzing attack, and then way back with Greg Schiano at Rutgers, and he followed him in that short stint in Tampa Bay. So he does have an NFL resume before he went to the college ranks. But you did see similar to what we see in San Francisco or with the Jets, where it is that 4-2 front and a lot of those kind of Fangio-inspired principles on the back end, where you're going to run those pre-snap two-shell coverages that could then rotate into any sort of coverage after the snap. And like we've seen with Robert Saleh's defense, like we see from a Fangio defense, ideally these coordinators don't want to blitz a ton, but they do want to be very good with their blitzes and efficient when they do blitz, and aren't afraid to mix up their fronts, whether it's with stunts or just pre-snap, putting guys mugged up at the line of scrimmage to cause some of that confusion, cause incorrect slides and mental mistakes from the offensive line, where even if sometimes you are rushing for, you're still getting a phantom pressure where a defensive lineman or a blitzing linebacker or a blitzing DB comes in free. And I think that was the biggest change up from the Joe Barry defense that was so bad here in Green Bay. Of all the criticisms of Joe Barry, I think maybe the most under the radar one was just how inefficient the Packers blitzes were under that defense. So many times it was guys blitzing from depth that even if they went unblocked, it took them 4 seconds to get there, or just being super predictable in terms of who was coming and where they were coming from. Having watched those Packers defenses for years, very rarely did the Packers blitzes get through and impact the quarterback quickly. And then you just ended up, with guys wide open on the back end because you didn't have as many guys in coverage. And yes, there were some other differences here. It was a 4-2 front instead of a 2-4 front. They ran more cover 2 and cover 6 than quarters, which you would have seen in a Joe Barry defense. And I think the overall coaching of the communication of those match zones on the back end was much better. But I think the key to the Packers' success last year was they were 29th in the number of plays that they actually blitzed last year, yet they were 17th in the NFL in total EPA added on blitzing plays. So essentially, they had sound coverages on the back end, more often than not, keeping 7 guys in coverage, but they did still put the fear of God in you that they would heat you up at any given moment, which forced offenses to get rid of the ball quicker than they needed to at times, and again, get some of those free rushers even from their 4-man rushes. And then also just from a run defense standpoint, the Packers were just so clearly better against the run than they've been in a long, long time. Doing a lot of those Saleh and D'Amico Ryan's inspired concepts where you're going to try to make it feel like you're running into a hurricane, where you're slanting guys up front. Some of those pass rush stunts double as run defense stunts. So you're causing chaos for offensive linemen, where you're going to get more missed assignments, more guys free in the backfield to kind of force the running back to change lanes. And then the way that they coach these linebackers to get upfield and play more aggressive, loading the box when they needed to, using a dime safety as your starting nickel corner in Javon Bullard, as opposed to an undersized slot corner that can't get off blocks and take on the run. A lot of different ways that they were able to stop the run much better. And again, they were top 10 in run defense DVOA last season as well. So the scheme is working here in Green Bay, not just on defense, but on offense. I will wrap this up again by repeating that Matt Lafleur and this coaching staff as a whole, I do believe, is the biggest asset that this Packers team has, contributing towards them winning football games in Green Bay. But that is not to say that this roster just stinks, and certainly not to say that this roster doesn't have a lot of potential on it. As I said in the intro, this is the youngest roster in the NFL today. So let's get into it, and we will begin discussing the quarterback room. And firstly, with their offseason changes, no changes here, staying neutral with the same room that they had last year. But let's talk about Jordan Love and a big year 3 for J-Lo. And he has really become one of the more polarizing quarterbacks to discuss out there. He has a lot of haters, a lot of people, I think, going back to the draft, we're not a big fan of Jordan Love. A lot of people aren't a fan of the fact that you didn't get to see anything from him for the first 3 years of his career. And above all, in the social media era, the most shared Jordan Love plays out there are certainly the occasional Jameis Winston-esque moments from him that I think stick at the forefront of a lot of football fans' memories on Jordan Love. So there is a perception that Jordan Love is not a good quarterback out there. I'm not saying everybody has that opinion, but it does lead to a lot of polarizing conversations on Jordan Love. Now, I definitely lean much towards saying, no, he's a good quarterback here for the Packers. But I will say this, I mean, for a guy that's now in... Is this his 6th NFL season, right? Yes, 3 years backing up Rodgers and 2 years as the starter here. It's hard to think of a 6th-year quarterback where I can really say with a lot of confidence that I don't really know what Jordan Love is yet. I think I know what the floor is. And the floor is a top 18 QB in the league that can make really exciting plays happen, that has, frankly, excellent pocket presence and improvisational ability, but someone that has a firm understanding of his offense, that makes good reads, maybe not great reads always, but I would say top half in the league in terms of how he processes defenses and can play on time within his offense. Someone that works to all three levels of the field and gets through pro reads and NFL progressions consistently, and someone with well above average arm strength and athletic capabilities. So with the physical tools, above average mentals, and improvisational playmaking skills, I think, it's going to be hard to be a truly bad quarterback when that happens. But there's a couple core reasons why I just don't think we know what Jordan Love's ceiling is at this point. And the first thing is just, we're talking about a very small sample size here. Just 2 seasons as a starter, and even then, it's hard to break those seasons down because year one was a tale of two halves where the first 9 starts of his career were very rocky, very questionable, and the second half, he played like a top 6 to 7 quarterback by any sort of metric you want to look at. The film was fantastic. The Packers loved what they saw. They gave him a top of the market or near top of the market quarterback extension off the heels of that. He was fantastic. But to call that first season evaluating Jordan Love polarizing would be to say the least. But then you go to what is just his second season, and you have to be honest about the fact that he was severely injured for, I would say, 2/3 of the season. And, Jordan Love detractors will conveniently ignore that, say he had a down second season and that's who he is now. But watch the tape. I mean, when he comes back from the knee injury that we all, I think, thought they were going to land from that long plane ride back home from Brazil, and we were going to get the news that ACL was torn. Fortunately, it was not, but when he came back, he did not have the mobility that we are used to seeing with Jordan Love. That is such a big part of his game and what made him great in that first season as a starter. Not just the playmaking ability, which is a huge boon for him, but the ability to drift in the pocket. Think of those plays from him where he's navigating the rush and buying time to make in-structure throws, especially when he's under pressure and he kind of drifts back and throws off his back foot and makes these really high-leverage throws that not a ton of quarterbacks have that individual ability to do. Think of that touchdown against the Cowboys in that big playoff win where they get the blitz. He knows the guy's going to come unblocked because they don't have enough blockers for it. But he pairs that pre-snap processing to know he's going to have a receiver deep down the field. He just drifts away from the rush with his arm talent, makes that off back foot throw for a huge back-breaking touchdown against the Cowboys. Those throws show up on a healthy Jordan Love's tape all the time, but that's the one worth remembering, I think. And those throws weren't available for Jordan Love either when he was injured. He just clearly was not comfortable with his lower half. And then he did gradually get more healthy and started to play much closer to the Jordan Love we saw in the second half of 2023. But even then, there were a couple moments where he had to come out in the second half. He had to come out in the second half, week 8 against the Jaguars, where he seemed to have a little bit of a setback there after things were starting to look better. Malik Willis finished that game for the Packers. There were other moments throughout the season where you can see him kind of limping and just not fully himself. And then even week 18, he had an elbow injury where he comes out in the second half against the Bears. Probably would have stayed in the game if, that game was really only the difference between the 6 seed and the 7 seed. But he was questionable heading into that Eagles playoff game. He just was not healthy. And man, that's just the reality of what happened last season. I think it just, in many ways, I don't want to say you just throw out the year. I think there's still some games where he's healthy and you can evaluate how he's playing. I'll continue to talk about him here. But we are just talking about a very small sample size on Jordan Love. And I do think in many ways you can kind of go back to how we felt about Jordan Love heading into last season and mostly hit the reset button in terms of let's see what next season looks like. Of course, making this third season now very big for us to learn what he can be at his best. Now, the other reason I think it's hard to know what his true upside is the inconsistency in his game. Just ignoring all the injury stuff, there are a couple detractions in Jordan Love's game that do hold him back. And the first and foremost, by far the biggest weakness on Jordan Love, that if he could just be above average at this individual trait, I think we are talking about a top 10 quarterback in the league, and that is accuracy. There is not a top 20 quarterback in the league as inaccurate as Jordan Love, and it is infuriating. He fades away too often. I think there's times when the fadeaways are a good idea, like we talked about, when you're under pressure and you need to make those off-platform throws. That's great. That's what all the game's greats do, is utilize their great arm talent to make those off-platform throws. But when you got a clean pocket and you got a wide-open dig route, step into the damn throw, brother. He leaves so much meat on the bones from a passing game perspective, all 3 downs, whether it's putting his team in, long down and distance or third downs where there's guys open and he's just missing them. So drive killing types of throws. And also he limits run after catch opportunities a lot of times where receivers have to slow down, turn around, invite defenders back into tackling range. Whereas if he just led receivers more often, these guys would thrive. And then in the worst case scenario, he sails balls over the middle of the field that get intercepted. There was a big one against the Bears in Chicago in the first Bears game where the Packers had an opportunity to take the lead late and he just sails a throw that gets picked. And this is something that really hurt him in the first half of 2023. I think we certainly saw it get better in the second half of 2023. And last year, I think you can say it was an issue for him from start to finish. How much of it was, number one, the bad turf in Brazil that was impacting everybody from Josh Jacobs to Jalen Hurts, you name it. Anybody that watched that game could see it was tough for the players to get their bearings with their cleats. And then after that, how much of it was the knee injury, not having that typical foundation that he's used to drive from. In his second season, you can start to maybe question if it was impacting him a little bit. But even with that, it's still the primary concern for me on Jordan Love. And we've seen other quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, find ways to work at it, work on their technique. The Packers, as good at developing quarterbacks as anybody in the league, you'd think have the right coaching here to continue to work on this stuff. If Jordan Love can improve the accuracy, he is not just in business, he is going to put himself in a position to be a tier 2 or better quarterback because, as I've kind of mentioned, everything else mostly comes together on Jordan Love. The physical traits, The processing, the pocket presence, it is all there. The accuracy is the core thing that holds him back, in my opinion. And then the other common criticism on him is that he's Jameis Winston, he's Will Levis. That drives me crazy because it's just not an accurate representation of who Jordan Love is as a quarterback. Does he have 2 or 3 plays in a season where his brain farts and he has these just ugly YOLO ball moments where he's about to get sacked and he lobs the ball up to a defender? Or in the biggest of spots in that 49ers playoff game in 2023, he tries to do his best Brett Favre representation and throw across his body into 2 defenders when they're in a position to win that game late. Yeah, they exist, and they're going to get thrown around on Twitter, and people are going to make fun of him for it. But I can't stress this enough, whether people will listen or not, that is not the average Jordan Love experience. We are talking about 2, maybe 3 times in a season amidst 600 or 700 dropbacks where that type of play happens. He was perfectly average in terms of turnover-worthy play percentage. 2.7%, that put him 20th out of 44 eligible quarterbacks last year. Guys right next to him include Jared Goff, Josh Allen, below him, Jalen Hurts, Baker Mayfield, Matthew Stafford. Do you want to see him take better care of the football and eliminate especially those boneheaded mistakes? Yes, absolutely. But the idea that he is Jameis Winston, who literally was 44th on that list, turnover-worthy play rate double of Jordan Love, 5.2% for Jameis to Jordan Love's 2.7%. That is such a silly narrative for a guy that, generally speaking, is well above average in terms of processing and decision making. And yes, he is an aggressive processor. He is a guy that loves to, push the limits in terms of threading zone windows, throwing with anticipation. It is a significant benefit to his game. But as a young quarterback and as an aggressive decision maker, he's going to make some reads that are questionable. More than a lot of QBs out there. There's going to be times where the safety makes a good play because he's testing the limits of that safety's range. Or, yeah, he is going to have some mistakes where he doesn't see linebackers. He thinks he's got one thing and the defense gives him another thing. Those mistakes will happen. You acknowledge that it's a part of his aggressive processing that leads 4 times over to really impressive throws into zone windows that a lot of quarterbacks end up taking sacks instead and just not attempting? Do you hope that processing continues to get even better and you eliminate some of the mistakes he has made in his first 2 years as a starter? Yes, of course. Absolutely. It's a reason we're bringing this up in the negative portion of the Jordan Love breakdown. But it does drive me a little bit crazy that I think the public perception of Jordan Love is that he doesn't know how to read defenses and he's just out there slinging it every play, hoping he gets lucky, and that it's just not representative of his tape and his production, frankly. And there is certainly room for that to get even better, and that would be the hope, that the turnover-worthy plays, especially those just 2 or 3 complete bonehead mistakes that he makes, you can hopefully eliminate those. But even if that doesn't go away, if he just improves his accuracy, I think we are talking about a top 10 quarterback in Jordan Love. So to wrap all of this up, he is a huge wild card for the Packers this season. He's a tough guy to rank for all the reasons we discussed. Right now, I have him as the 13th overall quarterback in the league, as a tier 3 quarterback, a good quarterback that you can win with. But at the same time, a lot of the quarterbacks in that tier are high floor, good quarterbacks, whereas Jordan Love is in this tier where it's like he's just been kind of month to month, week to week, and can we get the complete, consistent picture on him where I think he could very much be a top 10, tier 2 quarterback as a starting point. I'm not going to quite go and say he could be elite. He's got a good bit to clean up before we get to that range. But if he can get into that tier 2 this season, which we've seen him play at that level in the second half of 2023 when he was healthy, now that, as we're going to talk about, he's got much better playmakers to throw to, then I do think the Packers can get into legitimate Super Bowl contention as early as this season. If the inconsistencies stay, if the accuracy remains an issue, it is going to be harder to expect this Packers team to basically put together a 3 or 4 week playoff run against playoff opponents and go as far as they want to go with Jordan Love as their QB. So you guys will have to let me know if that is fair analysis of Jordan Love or not, and where you would rank Jordan Love. Again, I have him as the 13th overall quarterback, 12th as a passer, and then, he doesn't really do too much in the designed run game, and the Packers don't really tap into him in that sense either. He's an effective scrambler as an athlete. That shows up in the passing grade, but he's not as creative and explosive as a designed runner necessarily. He doesn't break a ton of tackles necessarily. He's not skinny, but he's not built to run through tackles and hold up in the design run game. So the Packers don't really tap into him in that sense. Now, as we move forward, their backup very much would be involved in the design run game, as we saw in 2 games last season. Malik Willis in effectively 3 full games, because he had 2 starts and then came in for the second half twice. He had 20 attempts for 138 yards. 12 of those 20 carries were designed rushes. So they definitely tap into that side of things. And then Willis did show some legitimate progress as a passer to actually step in, at least get to his first read, throw the ball on time. It certainly was not all perfect as a passer. He, was brand new to this offense. When he was starting, he'd only been with the team for 2 weeks. So it was very impressive that he came in and played as well as he did. I'm still not quite ready to say he's definitely going to ascend to being an interesting starter for somebody. Some of those conversations were starting to come up of okay, he's going to be heading into his last year of his rookie contract here with Green Bay. Is he somebody that maybe teams want to entertain as kind of a interesting potential, come in and compete for a starting job type of signing? It's something to keep an eye out for. I definitely like him as a really nice backup that can raise the floor to your run game. But if we do see him, and maybe this is a big preseason for him as well to showcase his skills, but if he could show a little bit more here now with a full year getting prepared with this team, maybe. But at least for this season, the Packers have, I would say, one of the better backups in the league in Malik Willis. And I think that's fair. They went 2-0 with him as the starter last year. Then after that, you got Sean Clifford. This team better get another QB in here fast if they're going to lose Malik Willis in free agency, because I still, for the life of me, don't understand why Brian Gutekunst lit a 5th-round pick on fire and drafted him. Maybe that could be Taylor Elgersma out of the Canadian ranks. He had some fans in the draft. I didn't end up getting to his tape. I didn't have any of it. But he was a Senior Bowl participant that the Packers are going to bring in, and maybe he can develop to take Sean Clifford's job in 2026. But that is your quarterback room. Again, a true wild card critical factor for this team is just what the hell is Jordan Love here in year 3. It's a big overarching question mark for this team. But let's go to the weapons here with who Jordan Love has to throw to. Taking a look at their offseason changes, as I mentioned, I consider this an upgraded group. They draft Matthew Golden in the 1st round. Hallelujah, they finally did it. Never thought I'd see the day where the Packers spent a 1st-round pick on a wide receiver. But this group was so bad last year. Warren Sharp put out a tweet that the Packers led all teams in incompletions due to wide receiver error last season, whether that was drops or miscommunications. It was time for the Packers to go and get a reliable go-to number 1 wide receiver. They draft Matthew Golden in the 1st round. We will break him down in depth in just a second. But they also add Mecole Hardman, who hopefully will just be a return option for this team. And they did spend a 3rd-round pick on Savion Williams out of TCU. I certainly wasn't the biggest fan of him as a wide receiver prospect. Don't think that's a huge addition in the same way I do with Matthew Golden coming in here. But in terms of losses, it's technically nobody. Christian Watson is up in the air. I have him yellow coded in the sense of this could go either way. He has always dealt with injuries, and he went down at the very end of the season, a week 18 ACL tear. In real time, it felt like that might be the last time we saw Christian Watson in a Packers jersey, given his inability to kind of stay on the field consistently, because he had missed some games throughout the season even before that. But overall returns on his recovery are very positive. He's going to start the season on the PUP list, and then there's a chance we see a half season, 3/4 of a season from Christian Watson. Outside of his other injury history, we are right around the 9-month period for that ACL recovery. So it's not crazy to think that he's back. But having played 48% of their snaps last year and playing pretty well when he did play, he's certainly a wild card in terms of, is he a loss? Is he an addition? Is he a push? Hard to necessarily say at this point in time. But the addition of Matthew Golden, I do say the wide receiver room is upgraded. And then tight end making no change, staying neutral. But just as Jordan Love was, I have this group of weapons as a core critical variable for this team, getting that wild card icon, where this unit's going to go a long way towards determining if this team can achieve their goals this year. As we start the season, it's not a bad unit necessarily. They rank with a B- grade, 18th to 21st in the league, but the upside for this unit is fantastic. So if this team can get closer to their upside this season, obviously that would go a long way towards this offense making some noise this year. Let's start this conversation with Matthew Golden. In my opinion, in terms of grading first-round picks like as they happen, this to me is the best first-round pick the Packers have made probably since Brian Bulaga, just in terms of getting value out of the pick, making the right pick, not botching it. Quay Walker. I have tremendous expectations for Matthew Golden coming in here because of the opportunity and because of what I felt about him as a prospect. And as I talk about him, you're just going to have to take my word on what I watched on film, because normally I would be able to showcase that to you guys, but Texas, for some reason, is the only college that still wants to block film on YouTube. Not trying to say that too loud. But anyway, I had Matthew Golden as the 12th overall player in this draft. The Packers get him with the 23rd pick. And as far as my high-end pro comp, he reminds me so much of Stephon Diggs. And this pick, I'm not saying he's going to be Justin Jefferson. Obviously, JJ is the best wide receiver in the league. I'm just saying, as far as when the Vikings got Justin Jefferson in the 20s of that draft, I said the same thing where I was like, how the hell did the Vikings get Justin Jefferson where they got him? Same concept here with Matthew Golden, where I think this team may have stolen a wide receiver that we look back on and maybe as soon as the end of the season and say, what were NFL teams doing? This guy is special. Again, not saying he's going to be Justin Jefferson, but could it be Stephon Diggs? I absolutely think so. I think the skill set is eerily familiar. The size is almost identical, 6'1", 195. Someone with very good speed, but beyond that, the acceleration, the change of direction, the foot speed, that is what has always made Stephon Diggs such a great route runner, such a great separator, and the number one wide receiver that he ultimately is. But it's not just the athletic levers and the route running and the release that is all available on Matthew Golden's tape, but the hands. This dude has strong hands, catches everything through contact, has the same thing Stephon Diggs has where he can contort his body for tough catches, he elevates for contested catches. He really has that true number one wide receiver profile where he can win to all three levels, win after the catch, and win at the catch point, and have stable hands. And it was really unfortunate, honestly, to see the consensus dialogue on Matthew Golden shift after he ran a 4.29 40. For some reason, after he ran that fast, the narrative shifted from everything I just said about him, where he's the complete package as a receiver, to, well, he's a vertical threat that his tape doesn't show 4.29 speed. No, that's not the way you should look at Matthew Golden. I think some people say, oh, he's the Christian Watson replacement here in Green Bay, because obviously Christian Watson's hurt and probably going to walk after this year. No, that is so far from his skill set. This is much closer to being the Packers' Devontae Adams replacement. And if he happens to have 4.29 speed and you can do some of the vertical field stretching stuff with him, great. I don't think he does. I think he had great technique getting out of his stance and the amazing acceleration that he has, that I talked about him well before he ran that 40, that this guy has some of the best first step acceleration that I've seen from a college prospect. That probably helped him run a better 40 time. And by the way, sure enough, out of the 37 players on my own draft board, he was tied for first for 10-yard split, which is how fast they were within those first 10 yards. So that's backed up. I think we are more realistically talking about someone with 4.4, 4.44 type of speed. And that is absolutely fast enough to be a true number one wide receiver. That is roughly Justin Jefferson territory. Again, I'm not saying he is Justin Jefferson, just the raw speed I think is comparable. Stephon Diggs, can't remember quite what he ran, but having watched so much of him, I would say he plays at about 4.4-ish, like plenty enough to separate at a very high level. And by the way, through camp so far, all of the things he did well in college that we just praised him for seem to be showing up in camp. So to wrap this up, because I could go on and on and on about how good I think Matthew Golden's going to be here, I think he's going to be one of the most impactful rookies in the first season out of this draft. If you want to talk about fantasy football, get all the Matthew Golden you can, whether you're in a redraft or a best ball league on Underdog. His season-long Underdog numbers are way too low. This is a great opportunity to sign up, hopefully win some money off of Golden here, and support my channel here. Code TFG. They'll give you a bonus match up to $1,000 on Underdog Fantasy. But his numbers are asinine. 724 receiving yards. I think he gets that. 4.5 receiving touchdowns. I definitely think he goes higher than that. And even the 100-yard games, he just needs 2 of those if you wanted to go with that. So, I mean, I like pairing that with some of these other wide receivers we've really gassed up in this series. Marvin Harrison, I think, goes higher on his numbers. DK Metcalf, George Pickens, Nico Collins. You can combine Golden with any number of those guys for some pretty wild payouts over there at Underdog. So there is your promo for today's video, and a huge shout out to Underdog for being just the best of partners to work with over time here on this channel. So a ton of value for Golden over there. And if you play Dynasty Leagues on Sleeper, I still can't comprehend why he's like the 11th pick in Dynasty Leagues. I published my Dynasty rankings on my Patreon, and Matthew Golden is at worst the 4th rookie in this class from a Dynasty League perspective, in my opinion. So wherever it is in your fantasy formats to get the opportunity to get Matthew Golden, my advice is buy. And if I'm wrong, I apologize. You guys can come get mad at me in the future, but I did say the same thing about Josh Jacobs on this team last year, and anybody that took him in the 3rd round or wherever the hell he was going last year, 4th round, you certainly did just fine with that pick. But yeah, he is a rookie in terms of a real football conversation here, and in a series where we don't give rookies like too much benefit of the doubt. These guys still have to come out and prove it. Like, we're obviously not projecting Matthew Golden and ranking him as a number 1 wide receiver. He's coming in my opinion, with a very good floor and a very fair projection. But if he can reach that star rookie wide receiver level that we've seen, isn't necessarily a rarity in today's NFL. So many rookies have stepped onto the scene and made huge impacts. Not just the aforementioned Justin Jefferson, but Brian Thomas, Ladd McConkey just last year. I mean, it is definitely becoming a position that these guys can show that they are ready to go out the gate. And if that can be the case with Matthew Golden, where you're talking about an offensive rookie of the year candidate, an 1,100-yard receiver that can really act as a young version of himself as this team's number 1 wide receiver, this team can absolutely start cooking, because if that happens, everybody else here falls into a really nice role for their skill sets. None more so than Jayden Reed. And Jayden Reed, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were a head case and were like, sensitive about this team drafting a wide receiver and like had to go to the coaching staff and like confirm that you're still the number one. Like, I don't know what the hell that was all about. Didn't take him for someone to have that kind of wide receiver diva mentality. But to be realistic about the situation, even if the Packers are telling Jayden Reed he's the number one, no, like that's not Jayden Reed's skill set. Jayden Reed's skill set is like ideal number two. And that's not to take away from all of the things he does well. It's just being realistic about it. And the Packers were realistic about it by drafting someone with more of a traditional wide receiver one skill set in Matthew Golden. But Jayden Reed as a number two now could be unbelievable. I mean, he runs great routes. He separates. He's got the speed. He's a legit vertical threat that, as a number two, like drawing number two corners and having safeties potentially shading away from him a little bit more. For a shorter wide receiver, Jayden Reed has proved the exact same thing that I said about him in my college eval on him, where there's a lot of Tyler Lockett to his game, where he's able to, yes, win from the slot and be really shifty and savvy after the catch, but is super underrated as a vertical threat and has great ball tracking ability and body control and some strength to play through and win tough contested catches. He came down with 9 out of 13 contested catches last year. That was 69%. That's extraordinary. And to this day, I will stand by that Tyler Lockett comparison. But Tyler Lockett was always at his best as a number two and was one of the better wide receiver twos in the league for a long time. So can that be Jayden Reed now? Yes, absolutely. So I love him in this role. One main thing with him is just gotta clean up the drops, man. 10 drops last year, tied for third most in the league, and his drop rate was also fifth. While we're here, Dontavion Wicks was number one at 18%. Funny enough, 4 of the top 8 were Brian Gutekunst guys. Wicks number 1, Allen Lazard number 2, Reed number 5, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling number 8. But as I mentioned, that Warren Sharp stat that the Packers led the NFL in incompletions due to wide receiver error. Obviously, the drops from Reed here and Dontavion Wicks were a heavy contributor towards that. Left a lot of meat on the bones, left a lot of drives on the bones. People don't realize, like, you only get 7 or 8 drives in a game. If you drop a pass on third down, that kills a drive. That's a massive swing in win expectancy and stuff. Just can't have it. And Jayden Reed, higher in the pecking order last year, got some more of those high leverage targets. Hopefully a more reliable Matthew Golden getting some of those high leverage targets will go a long way for this Packers team. And then I'm going to kind of go by pecking order here and go to Tucker Kraft, who I think will be the third most targeted player in this offense. Such a solid, stable, physical possession tight end. Still getting better, in my opinion. He has absolutely won this starting job from Luke Musgrave, who was drafted a round higher than him in the same draft. And is Tucker Kraft the best athlete, the biggest mismatch problem, the guy you want to, dot up a linebacker or a safety to help you move the chains on a critical third down? No, that's why these other pieces are here. But as a part of their play action attack, as a run after catch threat, where he's at least top 10 in the NFL for run after catch for tight ends. You'd have to really go through it, but he's probably closer to 5. He's super tough and instinctive after the catch. And then as someone that doesn't drop the football, he had a 3.5% drop rate, just 2 drops last year on 70 targets, and a tough contested catch ball winner on third downs and in the red zone, where he could see even more targets there. 4 for 7, 57% contested catch win rate last year. It's a role in this offense that they need. The run after catch production within the scheme especially, and reliability with his hands. And then as a blocker, he's getting there. He's got the size to do it. He's got the toughness to do it. I think that could be a even bigger part of his game as a tight end too. But with him as the third member in this pecking order would make a ton of sense. Again, hopefully with Matthew Golden kind of taking that crown as this team's number one. And then it starts to get murky. I mean, you have Josh Jacobs there. He is really good in the check down game, in the screen game, not necessarily a route runner or anything like that. That's where Marshawn Lloyd's going to get in the mix. Hopefully, if he can stay healthy, that was something he did good at USC. So, you're going to have that part of it. We can kind of check off the running back contributions to the weapons here right there. But then you get into all of these other ancillary weapons at this point. I think Romeo Doubs, now as the fourth most targeted player of this offense, in a position where he's in a rookie contract, kind of has to compete and be more reliable and kind of earn an extension here maybe, and very much could earn a healthy spot as this team's number 3 wide receiver. That's a great spot for Romeo Doubs. If they headed into the season where he had to be this team's number 1 outside wide receiver, I'd be terrified because he is just not reliable. There's a lot to like with him. He can stack cornerbacks deep. He's got underrated speed. He has excellent release and route running. He can absolutely get open. And he makes some of the most batshit crazy impressive catches that you'll see from these Packers weapons throughout the year. And he even had a 66% contested catch win rate. But he, of all of these guys, felt like he was the one with those frustrating third down drops. Right when you feel like Doubs is going to break through, he has a stinker of a game. He's a total hands catcher, and that's respectable. He loves to attack the football with outreached arms, but his hands just aren't that strong. So that's really the issue on Doubs. You don't want him getting those high leverage targets right now until he can be more reliable in that sense. But as a backside flanker running digs and comebackers now, as a third member of Jordan Love's progressions, he settles in a really nice spot. The only other note on Doubs that has to at least be brought up briefly is he has had some really bad concussion luck. And I think the fear that one more unfortunate hit to the head or landing on the back of his head could maybe be the end for Doubs. I really don't want to speculate any further than that, but there has been some definitely conversations surrounding that, and I do think that also played a factor in the Matthew Golden selection as well. So his availability on top of his on-field play definitely makes him a wild card of sorts, though they aren't counting on him quite as much as someone like a Matthew Golden. And then you have Dontavion Wicks. He is absolutely a wild card in this picture as well. Super impressive rookie season, second season hits, and still can get open. Still a tough dude, still run blocks, still does some stuff that they like from him. But as we mentioned, he was number 1 in the league in drop rate. I shit you not, this dude dropped 18% of his targets. That's almost 1 out of 5 times Jordan Love threw him the football. He dropped it. You can't play if that's happening. There's no way around it. So he's going to have to earn those targets. You know, I think him and Doubs are in a nice competition now. Like, who can learn how to catch consistently as this team's third wide receiver? These guys have relatively similar skill sets. Wicks a little bit thicker and more physical brand of football. Doubs a little bit more of a finesse and speed element. But I think it's a healthy competition, especially in Doubs' case where his contract is set to expire. Wicks has 2 more years left on his deal. But if Wicks can't, catch, he can't play. So that's really what it comes down to with him. And then the Christian Watson, we talked about this a little bit with the offseason changes, at least in terms of his availability. That's a huge wild card. And it's not just getting back out there on the field, it's staying healthy for him. This guy's body is constantly betraying him. And I'm not going to lie, I'm very impressed by some of the stuff he's saying about, his mentality, his approach to all this is yes, this sucks ass that my body keeps failing me. But basically he's I'm still living the good life. I'm still in a position to recover from this and make an impact on this team and play the game I love for a living. Love all of that mentality. So definitely pulling for him. He was awesome last year when he got rolling. When the Packers offense was really clicking, Christian Watson was clicking. And dude, it does feel a little bit like far-fetched to imagine him reclaiming a future on this team. He's heading into a rookie contract here. They just drafted Matthew Golden. They have other guys. He's got this injury record. But my Lord, if he could just stay healthy with everything we just said about all these other guys, imagine if you just stick legitimately one of the best true vertical threats in the league. I really think Christian Watson is in that conversation, just like true, raw, Z vertical threat wide receivers. Not saying he's like a better vertical threat than like Jamar Chase, you know what I'm saying? But him in that role with the way these other guys' skill sets break down, unbelievable fit. And he run blocks. The upside for him to return, plus Matthew Golden if he hits his upside, this could honestly get closer to being one of the best group of weapons in the entire league. And I do not say that lightly. Do I think that's likely? No, I think his injury record is damning, frankly. And I'm not counting that on that at all. That he is really not a factor in this weapons grade at all. It's just the upside for him is kind of floating out there as a what if for this team. Then beyond that, okay, Mecole Hardman, Savion Williams, I think these guys are kind of brought in with the imagination with the same role, and that is to return kicks. The Keyshawn Nixon fumbled kick return against the Eagles was horrible, and I don't think they fully trust him from the fumbles side of things on special teams. These guys, I think they can a little bit more, and they're both crazy explosive athletes. Hardman, I will say, like, he has at least flashed occasionally as a deep threat in the NFL with Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. If they need someone to just take those designed vertical shots with Christian Watson out, you can technically do that with Hardman. He will get open. Will he catch the ball? TBD. But I think they have a plan for him early on until Watson can hopefully get back out there. And then Savion is a different skill set. You know, I'll say it, he's a running back playing wide receiver that's also like 6'3". I couldn't have been any lower really on Savion Williams' tape. I just don't think he can catch. And as we've already detailed, Brian Gutekunst doesn't really care if you can catch as a wide receiver. That's been a problem for this team. So I just don't love that. But he's crazy explosive for a dude his size. But that's about it. I mean, there's a reason in 6 years at TCU he never really produced. Now, as a design touch dude, yeah, you already have Jaden Reed, so it's not necessary to get Savion involved, but like putting him in the backfield as a running back, I don't even mind him taking the Cordarrelle Patterson route and kind of hedging the Marshawn Lloyd pick here that we'll talk a little bit more about when we get to the running backs. But that's really all I see in Savion is a gadget player and a return man. Third round's a little bit early to take that, but maybe with the new kick return rules where you're penalized even more for touchbacks, he could make an impact in that sense. And then you have Malik Heath, who's had to play a little bit here, and he's more of a reliable possession wide receiver 5 or 6. He's fine in that role. And then they also pick up Will Shepherd in that mold. I like this as an undrafted pickup for the Packers. Probably going to be a practice squatter to start, unless he just outright takes Malik Heath's job. Probably not going to happen. He was acquired kind of late in the rookie offseason here. Not really sure why that is. Could just be, he's picky about, landing with the right organization. But yeah, he was a reliable contested catch ball winner for Shedeur at Colorado. He made some big time catches. One hand catchability, showed that at the Shrine Bowl as well. I thought he would get drafted 6th, 7th round. So a nice pickup there. And then you have some backup tight ends to talk about here. Luke Musgrave, anything you get from him is house money at this point. He's another guy that just hasn't been able to stay healthy. That plagued him in college as well. So that's really been the main thing holding him back. And then it's just led to inconsistent ability to like know what he's doing out there. He's a guy that like you catch Lafleur yelling at him. He hasn't developed as a blocker. It's just hard to develop when you can't practice that much. So he still has a lot of traits and speed and seam stretching ability. There is technically upside, and he's a part of the wild card, factor for this unit for sure. But definitely not someone you're counting on. And then you're going to have kind of a competition for the other tight end here. Ben Sims has played more than John Fitzpatrick. I do think John Fitzpatrick, they bring him over from Atlanta last year, and he was a really good blocker coming out. I think if you're looking for a full-sized inline blocking specialist, Fitzpatrick could be poised to kind of even emerge as this team's number 2 tight end this season. But he has to take that job from Sims and obviously Musgrave as well. Yeah, I think we're good here. Maybe we glossed over the potential impact of Marshawn Lloyd in the receiving game because he could be an actual legit like route running back. Something to at least keep an eye on. I'm not the biggest Marshawn Lloyd fan there, but at least in that phase, he did have talent catching balls out of the backfield at USC. And of course, you don't need that from him because Josh Jacobs is more than capable catching passes in this offense. Had 382 yards on 39 catches last year. Everybody else we will talk about here with the backfield. Let's go ahead and move forward into this group. Very minimal changes to allude to in terms of offseason changes with this group. They get Marshawn Lloyd back, who played 10 snaps for them last year, 1% of total snaps, third-round pick in 2024. And then a sneaky little pickup here, Israel Abanikanda, at 22 years old in year 3 on his third team, is going to join this Packers team. But this backfield is actually the highest ranking unit on this team right now, and that is led by Josh Jacobs, who I just think if Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley didn't have like all-time great running back seasons as they did last year, both guys who also changed teams in free agency just as Josh Jacobs did, we would be talking a lot more about what Josh Jacobs did for the Packers last year. And I'm certainly not trying to make the argument that Josh Jacobs is the best running back in the NFL, but he is every bit a superstar running back that he alone really warrants the Packers being where I have them here 5th in the NFL for their running back ranking. 1,400 yards, 16 touchdowns. He finishes 3rd in the NFL behind just Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley in missed tackles forced. So he had 79 there. Saquon had 83 and Derrick Henry had 89. But that's all through the playoffs. So Jacobs had 1 less game than Derrick Henry and 2 less games than Saquon there. He was 3rd in the NFL in yards after contact. PFF has a signature stat called elusive rating, which is taking a look at a couple different factors to determine like how much success on average the running back had independent of their blocking. And Josh Jacobs was 3rd there behind actually James Conner and Bucky Irving. And even just like raw PFF grade, Jacobs was 3rd. So what I'm trying to say here is he a beast. And what a signing this was for the Packers. As hard as I am on Brian Gutekunst, when he hits, he hits. And this was another just absolute slam dunk free agent addition. And the foresight to do this kind of before the league is now finally catching up to the idea that, okay, maybe running backs do kind of matter and they're underpaid. The Packers locked him up for $12.5 million a year through the next 3 seasons. And with all of the conversation about how the Ravens stole Derrick Henry, how the Eagles stole Saquon Barkley, absolutely not trying to take away from that. But when you factor in the longevity of stealing Josh Jacobs and the fact that his efficiency was right behind those guys, the Packers absolutely stole Josh Jacobs, quite possibly the best player on this football team, independent of positional value right now. So he's an absolute superstar. And really, I think, depending on if you value like the speed side of the Jahmyr Gibbs equation or the just 3-down balance of a Josh Jacobs, I think Jacobs is either the fourth or fifth best running back in the NFL. And then I guess we'll see what Ginty can be this year as well in that mix. But that's really where this ranking comes from, because the depth here is meh. I don't think you're panicking about the depth here, but Jacobs has got to stay healthy, and as the physical player he is, prove that he can hold up in a 3-down workload, because I'm just not that high on Marshawn Lloyd, especially in the run game. Like, I think taking a little bit off of Jacobs' plate on third down so that he can hopefully see a little bit less exposure to, getting hit and injury potential and that kind of stuff, I think that will be useful for this team. And maybe you can even get some more explosiveness on passing downs from Lloyd than you do from Jacobs. But I hated his vision coming out. He is tough. He runs with a little bit of like aggressiveness and power, but oftentimes he's so slow to see the hole that he's not able to take advantage of that. I just see like a poor man's DeAndre Swift, which for those that watch the Bears deep dive, I just don't think that highly of that type of a running back. They like him, and I did put him up there as this team's RB2, but that's in this sort of like typical game script. He's going to be the RB2, where he's getting some early down wide zone touches, some tosses, like try to get those sort of like, a lot of these teams are looking for that explosive play back, where you're not necessarily prioritizing vision. You're more prioritizing, hopefully the play call and the blocking is right. We tell him what hole to hit, and then you get him out in space where he's super explosive. He'll get some of those touches, and then the passing down stuff. But there's also going to be moments where, okay, number one, if Josh Jacobs does get hurt, I don't think Lloyd's role changes that much. I think we're talking about a split between Emmanuel Wilson and Chris Brooks as the kind of lead backs, if you will, the heavy carry getters. And then in your sort of like grounded out, we're up by 2 touchdowns, 4-minute offense type of stuff, they'll relieve Josh Jacobs in those spots too and go with like Emmanuel Wilson and Chris Brooks, who are both like adequate, big-bodied runners. Wilson has certainly shown some flashes as an undrafted guy coming into the league. If he had to see more starting role here in the unfortunate event of a Josh Jacobs injury, there would be some intrigue there. But even then, like, there was a lot of times where they took him off the field in favor of Chris Brooks. I think they do prefer Chris Brooks's vision maybe a little bit more. But both those guys, I think, are kind of lumped into a similar role. And Brooks is a more trustworthy pass protector, I think. But I would just plug both of those guys into kind of an adequate backup category of bigger backs. And then the one other interesting player here in this backfield is Izzy Abanikanda. Really only because he's only 22 years old and has really explosive play ability. And inside this Packers offense, I'm really just as interested, honestly, in Israel Abanikanda, who's like 2 years younger than Marshawn Lloyd still, even though he's been in the league an extra year. I'm just as interested in his ability to maybe make an impact if he gets an opportunity here. It's a total dart throw. They picked him up. Clearly something's off in terms of maybe vision or practice behavior or whatever it is. That's all just speculation. But getting cut by the Jets and the Niners as quickly as he has certainly isn't the best look for his prospects. But I'm still fascinated, mostly like because I don't think he turned 21 until the end of his rookie season. He is super young. But yeah, very, very good backfield as long as Josh Jacobs is healthy. Let's talk about the offensive line that is seeing their fair share of roster movement here from this offseason. The only loss here is Josh Myers, who they decided to let go when he could have been retained for quite cheap here. But a moderate loss. He was a low-end starter at center for them. But really 3 pretty substantial additions here, highlighted first and foremost by the massive Aaron Banks contract that I just, for the life of me, do not understand. We'll get further into that. But he's still at least kind of on par with Josh Myers in terms of talent base. They do get Jordan Morgan back, who dealt with an injury all year last year, only played 16% of their snaps. He was their first-round draft pick last season. And then Anthony Belton, a second-round tackle pick this season. So again, 3 relatively substantial additions there, and then a 7th round pick in John Williams. So I did say slightly upgraded on the offensive line, but this is a very, very good unit. They rank 10th for me for overall offensive line, better in pass blocking than run blocking, where they get a B+ grade as a pass blocking unit, which ranks 5th to 6th, and then run blocking, still top half of the league, 14th to 15th, but with a B- grade there. And I think there's going to be some intrigue with this breakdown just because there's a lot of kind of moving pieces and contract uncertainty and that sort of stuff. So it'll be fun to go through this unit, and I'll do my best to try to make this conversation make sense as far as how these guys plug in for now and for the future. So we'll go left to right here, and that starts with Rasheed Walker, who certainly has earned this starting left tackle job, a 7th round pick in 2022, which means he is heading into a contract season. And you better believe as a 7th round pick who has had very minimal career earnings, he is looking at the Dan Moore contracts of the world and saying, I'm trying to get my bag here because he is a much better player than Dan Moore. He is actually, just to play it safe, I would say he's a top 16 pass protecting left tackle based on his efficiency the last 2 years. He just isn't a guy that, for the most part, the Packers have had to worry about there at left tackle. It's not that he's like perfect and never loses. He still has like occasional hiccups with his technique where he fails to get hands on guys and they'll, find their way around him. And to be honest, he does lose to his anchor more often. Like, of his losses, I would say it's him getting pushed back in like a true drop back situation against really good power rushers. And, it's some of those maybe more uglier losses that have, I think, led to this team saying like, okay, he's a good player. We're fine with him at left tackle. If we reach a point where we want to extend him and he's now 3 years into this thing, like still a top, 20 left tackle in the league or so, that's fine. They've lived in that world. They've been totally fine with him in that world. But I think they look at him, coming off the heels of having a David Bakhtiari there, and they're like, well, it was really nice to have an elite left tackle, and if we could get that someday, that would be really nice. So, they're like mostly in on him as a starter, but haven't fully committed to him like a long-term extension or anything like they did with Zach Tom very recently. Tom's been even more efficient than that, established himself as a true franchise player for them. And another big part of that is Walker just is not a factor in the run game, which we know Matt Lafleur and this offense, they want to be able to assert their authority with their offensive line. And Rasheed Walker is the worst run blocker of the group. So I think that stands out even more than any questions they might have with his occasional losses in pass protection as why they might be looking to move on from him. But for this season, at least, he is here for like $800,000. He is one of the best value offensive linemen in the entire league today. And the floor is absolutely raised with him there as their left tackle. And when you talk about this team ranking out better as a pass blocking unit than they do as a run blocking unit, Rasheed Walker is the number one reason for that. But then at left guard, you've got Aaron Banks, who again, $19 million for this player blows my God-forsaken mind, especially for a team here in Green Bay that, like, we've already praised their ability to develop mid-round picks. Rasheed Walker was one of them as a 7th rounder. We still got to talk about Sean Ryan. They've done this seemingly for the last 20 years, been able to just find cheap guards and replace them willy-nilly. And honestly, it felt like they were in a pretty solid position to do that, especially if they maybe decided to just, like, they could have just brought Josh Myers back for 1 year, $6 million or whatever, who was still like okay for them last year. Not a strength of the offensive line, but as a weakest link, it's fine. And then they just jump at Aaron Banks, who Niners fans are like excited that he's gone, and they jump at him and throw $80 million at him. And then you get Packers fans like, oh, it's only a 1 year deal, really. Look at the contract details. They can get out of it after 1 year. Well, yes and no. Like, you're right to a degree that it's not a true 4-year contract, but if the best thing we're talking about is them cutting him after a year because we know he's just an okay player, well, he's still a $12.5 million dead cap hit next year if you release him. That is like half of Rasheed Walker's contract. That is a starting cornerback, a starting defensive lineman, the Xavier McKinney contract. Like, no, that's not just cutting him for nothing. Like, that's still dead cap that shows up on the books. And if they keep him, he's a $20 million cap hit that, yes, they can move around and push that money into future seasons, but that money doesn't just disappear. So it's not just all fake money. This is a massive investment in a guy that I just don't know that this team needed. Like, it's a slight upgrade. They're better off for him, but relative to what they cashed out to pay him, and that's also money that could have gone to other free agents as well, by the way, the math ain't math in there. So I am heavily critical of this signing. I really hope I'm wrong and that this offensive line is able to get something out of Aaron Banks that Kyle Shanahan couldn't have gotten out of in the last 4 years. But, okay, so he's a big, tough, relatively athletic guy for his size. He's got a good first step get off. He's explosive moving forward. Like, he can create that drive on combo blocks and stuff. That's the best thing he does, is the raw play strength aspect. But he does not have coordinated, agile feet. He plays out of balance a lot, which leads to him getting over his skis as a run blocker. Like, if you try to get him on the move as a wide zone blocker, he ends up on his ass a lot. He ends up lunging and, whiffing on blocks. So, like, he's a pretty good run blocker, but not a great one. He's inconsistent. He's going to have impact blocks, and he's going to have his whiffs. And then as a pass blocker, he's like total replacement level Band-Aid veteran. Relatively tough guy to drive backwards, but really struggles to stay square as a pass blocker as well. Any sort of finesse interior rusher, or when he's trying to pick up stunts on like looping defensive ends, they're going to give him a really hard time. This is a $6 to $7 million a year player that probably should have gotten, at best similar to like what John Runyon got for the Giants, like 3 years, $30 million. Maybe like what Ezra Cleveland got in Jacksonville, which I think was like 3 years, 24. What they paid him is mind-numbing. I don't know what the hell Brian Gutekunst was cooking with this one. But hopefully he can still contribute as a starter, and if he can be your weakest link, you get back to having a very positive conversation about this offensive line. There's still one other piece here that I think has to prove to be better than Aaron Banks, but has a chance to do that. That's Sean Ryan. So let's just keep it with the guards here, and then we'll talk about Elton Jenkins. Sean Ryan is like the exact example of kind of why I don't understand why they paid Aaron Banks. 3rd round pick who has developed very nicely here. He is heading into a contract year. Both these guys are very similar players in terms of kind of player archetype. But like, okay, so are you now not going to be able to afford Sean Ryan, who's probably going to be cheaper than Aaron Banks because he doesn't come with the like top 40 draft pedigree that Aaron Banks was attached to? Top 50 at least. He was the 48th pick, and whether you like it or not, being a top 50 pick does show up in these contract negotiations and how the league perceives you. Ryan being a mid-3rd round pick, well, it's going to make him a lot cheaper unless he just has a huge breakout season this year. That's just how the league works. And maybe they still work it out where they can, lock up Sean Ryan or whatever here, but it just muddies up that situation much more. And if Packers fans are getting upset with this criticism, I just want to remind you, I'm talking about the world where they probably bring Josh Myers back on the deal that the Jets gave him, which was like 1 year, $6 million, just as you kind of sort things out here. But I do like Sean Ryan. I love these tackle converts. It clearly took him some time to understand guard. It's a different position. But he had to edge out Jordan Morgan, who was dealing with some stuff last year, but these guys were competing at guard. They were even rotating a little bit earlier in the season. And Sean Ryan just clearly took this job. But he's a good, balanced, tough player. I think that tackle experience helps him with his technique. a lot of times against more finesse style rushers on the inside. But he's got the tenacity as a run blocker. He's got the play strength. It's just been a matter of like fully developing an understanding of his assignments and how to play fast and not whiffing on blocks. I do think the arrow is pointing up on him, and he can be a really solid guard. He's not the most tremendous athlete or anything like that to project as a star or a Pro Bowler or anything like that. But I definitely think as a third or fourth piece, you like what you have there. And I just don't, like, if they're going to lose him because of the Aaron Banks contract, I don't like that at all. We'll see how that plays out. But one thing I really do like is Elton Jenkins sliding into center. He has been a rock star when he's been asked to play center for this team, which hasn't been a bunch, but that's what he was coming out of college, was a center. They've played him at guard, they've played him at tackle at times where he was on and off, but the fact that he could even do it was super impressive. They love him, and rightfully so. He's emerged as a great leader for this team. Now getting to move into center, handling the calls, the twists, the stunts. I think he'll be a step up from Josh Myers for sure in terms of calling things out pre-snap and communicating those twists and blitzes and stunts. And he just slides over from being a top 5 to 6 guard to now being a top 4 or 5 center in the NFL. So I love the move inside for him. Really no questions that he can handle that. And then you go out to right tackle with Zach Tom, who just got the big contract extension. This is where that it pays double to find star players later in the draft. Not only did they get him for super cheap the last 3 years, but because he was a 4th-round pick, you see a discount in his contract. They get him for like $22 million a year, just a little bit more than Aaron Banks. Now there's more guarantees on Zach Tom's deal, of course, but like the fact that it's somewhat close to the Aaron Banks contract is just hilarious. Because Banks is like a take him or leave him starter, and Zach Tom's like a Pro Bowl level right tackle. Crazy athlete, crazy technique. He's really clicked in this run game the last 2 years. That's been a even bigger evolution in his game, is like the way they can weaponize him as on toss plays and in the wide zone run game, where they do still run a lot of wide zone. Like his ability to reach defensive ends and weak side back, strong side backers and stuff. Really, really fun run blocking tape. And he's good working on combo blocks, getting up to the next level, taking out a linebacker. But in pass pro, he's really, really good. The traits that did have him falling to the 4th round, a little bit smaller, a little bit shorter arms, like they can be limiting factors at times. There are times where he'll get matched up against a Montez Sweat or like a Myles Garrett, the freakiest length, power-based rushers in the league, and he's just a little outmatched physically. He'll hang in there for dear life and do what he can, but if you want to play the matchups a little bit, give him a little bit of chip help in certain spots if necessary. But for the most part, just so good at his hand technique, his feet to stay in front of guys. He has certainly been one of the best right tackles in the league over the last 2+ years. So the best player on this offensive line, I think. And not that it was ever a question for Packers fans that they were going to pay him, but good to see that it came at even a bit of a discount. And with all the kind of questions in terms of how this could all play out, certainly good to see that kind of taken care of here start heading into the season. Now, there's a couple interesting backups here. This offensive line runs really 7 deep, in my opinion, which is a huge asset for this team. And just with the way they like to do things, like they have so much positional flexibility. I think both these backups especially could play guard or tackle in Jordan Morgan and Anthony Belton. These are your 2 big draft investments the last couple of years. And we'll start with Jordan Morgan, whose career has just been off to a really rocky start. He dealt with, I want to say it was a shoulder injury in his rookie season, wasn't able to win that right guard spot from Sean Ryan. They saw him as, the potential starting right guard and, potential long-term left tackle, depending on how Rasheed Walker was going to play last year, as still a bit of an unknown heading into last season, being that 7th-round pick in Rasheed Walker. And just really didn't play much at all. Only played 16% of their snaps. He wasn't like horrible liability type of stuff when he did play, but Sean Ryan was just better. So he ends up taking a seat, and now he's kind of in developmental mode. Very much just wait and see on him. He was a Zach Tom-ish prospect in the sense that his technique was really good. He was an athletic run blocker, but not the longest arms or the most traitsy guy. So you can definitely understand like kind of what they saw in him and how he can develop on this team. But we just can't say with any certainty that he's like a starting caliber player for this team or that he was a good use of a first round pick. It really is just time will tell on him. And then Anthony Belton as well comes in as a second round pick. Totally different prospect for him. He's a really fun player. It's hard to find guys that are able to just move NFL sized humans as well as he does. Like when he down blocks on defensive ends, it's hilarious the amount of drive he can get. You really aren't going to power through him too often. At times, his feet can hurt his anchor where he can get a little bit of those floaty legs where he kind of elevates when he steps back a little bit too much. So you want to keep those feet grounded a little bit in his technique. But for the most part, like outstanding play strength. When he gets his hands on you, it's over. And he's not a horrible athlete for a guy with his play strength. A lot to like in his game. I think he's a really fun second round pick. And I think he could play guard or tackle for this team. So they're really positioned here where they've got their 5 starters, and then they're going to be in evaluation mode with both Morgan and Belton to kind of decide with Rasheed Walker and Sean Ryan's contracts coming up, like where can we replace and get cheaper? Where is our upside best? And how do they want to play this? But those several teams every year that are looking to improve their O-lines in free agency will definitely have their eyes on how this plays out because this team might be letting a pair of pretty good starters leave in Ryan and Walker, or maybe Banks does get released. But those are your core 7, and then you're getting into like developmental, like deep developmental territory. Like if Morgan and Belton have to play, you think they can probably do okay as backups. Whereas like, okay, Jacob Monk, John Williams, Kadeem Telfort, Trey Hill even, Monk and Williams were late round draft picks. Monk last year, John Williams this year, Telfort, an undrafted pickup with crazy size at tackle. And then Trey Hill gets picked up from Cincinnati. I liked him coming out of Georgia as a developmental center. I think getting him paired with the Packers O-line coaches as opposed to the Bengals O-line coaches could do wonders for a Trey Hill. So he's actually, of the 4 backups, the guy that I would be most fascinated by. Kind of getting under Elton Jenkins' wing and developing there could be fascinating. But yeah, I mean, just dart throw types of offensive linemen after that. Ultimately, they run 7 deep. That's better than they could have said last year, where they were out there throwing practice squatters to the wind against Jalen Carter against the Eagles. But yeah, if they have to go any deeper than that, just like most teams, they would start to run into some trouble. But yeah, it's a really good offensive line to round out an incredibly well-balanced offense here. So I have the Packers ranked as the 8th overall offense, 10th in passing game, 9th in run game. You certainly have some questions and pockets of upside, but it's pretty hard, unless you're like a huge Jordan Love hater, it's pretty hard to pick apart this offense and not seeing them have a lot of success on this side of the ball. And I mean, even last year, in what was in many ways kind of a in everything that could go wrong did go wrong season, they still look back on the year and they were 4th in offensive DVOA total, 3rd in both passing and running. So even this is lower than that. Obviously, DVOA isn't the God's word or anything like that, but you don't have a ton of concerns, and the upside is really exciting. If Jordan Love can be better, which I think he can be better than the 12th best quarterback in the league, if the weapons can be better, those especially are areas where this could be one of the best offenses in the entire league this year. And obviously, if that happens, you're going to be getting close to some Super Bowl potential there. But we do have to talk about this defense, and if they can hold up their end of the bargain again this year, it's a fascinating unit on this side of the ball as well. But let's start with the defensive line. So in terms of offseason changes, nothing major, but with the interior of the defensive line, they do say goodbye to TJ Slayton, their nose tackle from last year, who was solid. He got a decent 2-year, $12 million deal from the Bengals. And then they're looking to fill those shoes with a couple of Georgia defensive tackles. Nazir Sackhouse, an undrafted free agent, and a 6th-round pick in Warren Brinson. And I listed it in that order because I thought Stackhouse was the better player than Brinson coming out of that D-line. And right now, I have him on the depth chart, by the way. But I did say slightly downgraded. Losing TJ Slayton is a moderate blow to that defensive line in terms of size and run-stopping ability. But then on the edge, I said neutral here. Really, the only loss is Preston Smith, who they very willingly traded away midseason last year. Only played 27% of their snaps last year. He certainly is not the Preston Smith that we remember from a few years ago. Hell, I think he's still a free agent that they could bring back at any time if they wanted to. But they spent a pair of early day 3 picks on Barron Sorrell and Colin Oliver. We'll see what they get from them. But I said neutral at edge and, again, slightly downgraded on the interior D-line. Certainly a youth movement, though, with 4 new names that should be in the mix here. But as we break this D-line down, this to me, alongside with the quarterback and the weapons, are possibly the biggest wild card, pivotal factor unit for this Packers team. It's a tough unit to rank because they played below their expectations so much. Both Kenny Clark and Rashawn Gary, for example, had really unimpactful down years last year. We know they're capable of more than that. Kenny Clark still just 29 years old, Rashawn Gary 27 years old. I don't think these guys are past their physical prime necessarily. So those two guys especially, big years coming up in terms of where we're at with this defensive line. I mean, then you have a Lucas Van Ness as well, young player who you're hoping is trending up. So with that, I have the Packers as the 17th overall defensive line. They rank 11th to 17th for pass rush, and a little bit lower than that, 21st to 23rd for D-line run defense. But the rankings are almost like a general dart throw here. The wild card here is basically here to indicate this could be a bottom 6 or 7 D-line, as it kind of was last year, or 4 first-round picks along the starting 4 here. This could be a top 10 unit, which they, on paper, looked like they were going to be last year, and they just did not. They fired their edge coach. Kenny Clark, as well, has come out and said, yeah, my numbers were down last year compared to the last 3 years because I was dealing with a foot injury all year that he suffered in Brazil. Well, he's got to come out and prove that that's, the truth, and he can get back to what he was the previous 3 seasons. But needless to say, the talent, the investments are all here. At the end of the day, the talent, the investment, in many cases, previous years of good production, it's all here. But for a team that does like to rush with 4 and was towards the bottom of the league in blitz rate, and a team that, as we'll see later, has a very questionable secondary, this D-line has to play better. They're capable of it, but they got to go get it done, and it's all these guys. So let's start off the edge with Rashawn Gary, who you're hoping will be this team's best pass rusher, as he's been. I mean, even last year he was this team's best pass rusher, but, he's been a solid number 1 kind of borderline top 10 edge rusher since he's emerged as a starter. When they had Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith ahead of him very young in his career, he was more of a rotational piece, which is totally understandable. But in his 3 years as a starter, excluding last season, he's absolutely rushed with the efficiency of a legitimate high-end number 1 rusher. He had 87 pressures, 12 sacks in 2021. 2022, he was on pace to be near the league leaders in pressures. Mid-season, he had 38 pressures and 6 sacks when he tears his ACL. And then 2023, on a bit of a reduced snap count early on, he ends up 66 pressures, 10 sacks. Very, very good. Anytime you're talking about 65, 70 pressures, you're getting into like high-end number 1 territory. Last year, 49 pressures. Hard to find him some games. And it's hard to find an explanation. There wasn't some notable injury. Was available every single week. Could it be the switch to a, 4-2 hand in the dirt system? That's really the only explanation. For some reason or another, you look at him, 6'5", 270 pounds, you're like, yeah, that dude should be putting his hand in the dirt as a heavy-handed, 5 technique and a wide 9 and, collapsing after the quarterback flying off the ball. But for whatever reason, he's been much more efficient in Joe Barry's stand-up edge rushing, position. Now, they did fire their edge coach. It could have just been bad coaching. That could be the excuse. But for whatever reason, like at 27 years old, he had the one ACL injury, but nothing a freak athlete like him now, more than 2 years removed from that, shouldn't be able to like fully recover from. I don't watch him and say he's any less explosive than he ever was. I don't think that's the issue. He's just got to get back to what he was, man, here at 27 years old. I think it's fair to say he can do it, but it was not there last year. He was like a good number 2 last year. 49 pressures, 9 sacks. That's acceptable if you weren't asking him to be your best pass rusher, which they are. So I would say he's the biggest wild card here. Before we move off Gary, I do want to at least give him credit. I do think he had his best year as a run defender. Had the most defensive stops he's had in his career, and putting his hand in the dirt as more of a heavy-handed defensive end. It did show up there, which has been... It's been a criticism in his game as more of a stand-up edge. He would kind of lean outside a little bit too much and give up the inside lane quite a bit. But he was much more disciplined as a run defender, and that's at least one area where he's getting better at in his career. But you also have a huge wild card on the opposite edge in Lucas Van Ness. And I am very glad that the Packers didn't abort the Lucas Van Ness project, especially in favor of going with another project, which in this draft would have been like a Mykel Williams or a Shamar Stewart. And maybe if those guys were available, Brian Gutekunst wouldn't have been able to help himself. But like that's the mold that Lucas Van Ness is in. He was young coming out, not just by age, but like was never even a full-time starter at Iowa, because Iowa is a program that rewards their veteran players. But Van Ness in his redshirt sophomore season did get out there and made an impact in a rotational pass rush role for Iowa, but was relatively inexperienced in terms of setting a heavy edge in run defense, not much of a pass rush plan, not even a ton of time on task to develop great technique for that bull rush. Lucas Van Ness was always going to be, just to be real about what I said on him coming out, a 1 to 1.5 year project was always kind of the timeline on him. And the first year and a half, complete non-factor, Lucas Van Ness. To be fair, in the second half of last season, he did start to come on. From weeks 10 through the Super Bowl, he was actually 9th out of 109 players in pass rush win rate per PFF. And he was also 15th in PFF pass rushing grade in that time. You can scoff at PFF grades if you want. I have always maintained that their pass rushing grades are probably the most projectable, reliable grades that they do have for the player grades up there on PFF. Those in the receiving grades, I think, are pretty damn stable. So things were starting to click for him much more consistently right around the time where, you would have expected the light to come on with him coming out of Iowa. His traits are insane, man. He's got all of the size, length, explosiveness that you look for in a power edge. So I like the ringing endorsement on him, which was the Packers offseason, where they really didn't invest in this group at all. A 4th and a 5th round pick were the only guys they added. And he is going to have a clear runway. Like the first half of the year, Preston Smith was out there, still as a part of the starting rotation. I don't think it's a total coincidence that his departure lined up with Lucas Van Ness starting to play better either, right around that week 8, week 9 mark. So he's still totally unproven. We're still talking about a guy that, even with the improvements in the second half of the year, he only had 20 pressures on 256 pass rush snaps last year, 4 sacks. It's time. It's time for him to step up as the 13th overall pick that he was. And if he does, he was really drafted in the image of Rashawn Gary. If he figures it out, as Rashawn Gary did in his 3rd season, and if Rashawn Gary can be what he was in his 3rd season, you are up there in terms of like edge talent with your starters. But they got a ways to go before we're talking about them in that light. And then you do have a bunch of edge depth here. I do like the combination of guys that they can move in and out here. Kingsley Enagbare is a very, very stable edge 3. He's a heavy-handed run defender on early downs. He's got a little bit of power. He'll break out, the occasional pass rush move that'll trick an offensive lineman. He's got some good stuff in there. He doesn't have the explosiveness to project as a starter, but as a rotational third, he's in a perfect spot there. Brenton Cox Jr. actually came in the second half of the year and played really well. He didn't play until week 11 last year. I can't remember if he was hurt or if that was just because Preston Smith was there. They didn't have the snaps for him. I don't know that he has the traits necessarily to project as someone that you're like putting the up arrow on and like, oh my God, this guy could emerge as a starter. But I mean, he did defend the run well and had 18 pressures on just 110 pass rush snaps last year for 4 sacks. Like, this was a really crafty rusher that just kind of got it at Florida, even if he wasn't super athletic or anything like that. So, as a backup, I like him. Aaron Mosby did play last year as well. I think they're comfortable with him eating up 6 to 10 run defense snaps a game. And then you have a couple of guys they drafted. Barron Sorrell, Packers fans are excited about him as a 4th-round pick. I had him as a late day 3 type of guy. I thought this was a reach. I mean, high character guy, twitchy-ish, like pretty above average athlete. I don't see a starter in terms of traits, but he's got some athletic juice to him. But he just didn't have any pass rushing craft at Texas. And he's not like an overwhelming force as a run defender either. If they can get a 4th rotational piece in the 4th round, that's fine. But I don't think he's going to be much of an impact player for them. And then Colin Oliver is actually really interesting to me. Super explosive dude, super productive pass rusher in college that missed all but the first game and a half of his last season at Oklahoma State, but was able to come out and test really well. And he's just got the type of traits paired with the numbers to back it up in the time that he played in college that is worth gambling on in the 5th round. And he's kind of an undersized, like linebacker hybrid type, but for a team that can really get creative with their blitzes when they do blitz, you could maybe get some explosive, fun looks from Colin Oliver in this scheme for sure. Would not be surprised if he's more of an impact than Sorrell, who they drafted ahead of him. But then you go to the interior D-line, and less uncertainty with this group, but at least with Kenny Clark, what version of him do we get this year? Now, injuries are always a convenient excuse, but it did make sense when you hear that he says, yeah, I had a foot injury week 1, and it impacted me all year long. When you compare that to his last 3 seasons, where he was a top 10 interior pass rusher in the league, we're talking about an average of 60 pressures in each of those 3 years, 21 through 23. To put that in perspective, there were only 7 pass rushers this last season on the interior that got 60 or more pressures. Only 3 of them had 63 or more pressures, and in 2023, just the year before last, Kenny Clark had 66, 10 sacks. Like, he's a dude, and he's only 29 years old. So can he get that back? Is this quote unquote excuse about the foot injury on that turf in Brazil that we all saw, is it legit, or does he just not have it anymore? Or is this system hurting him? He's also one of the better just raw block shedders in the league. I do believe that. He's a very good run defender. He's going to have to play more nose tackle this year with TJ Slayton gone. He's not ideal for that. 314 pounds is just not the biggest size for a true nose tackle. Slayton played at like 335. But he's the guy with the size on this D-line that's going to have to do that. So it's not ideal, I think, asking him to put him into that position. I like him more as a 3-tech, but he can still hold his own as a nose tackle. He's just not, I wouldn't describe him as a top 10 run defending nose tackle. But this front is more of an even front, which means he's not going to be a true nose most of the time. It's just sometimes he's going to have to do that, whereas they had Slayton to do that in those spots last year. But yeah, he's a big wild card in terms of how he can bounce back. And then you got Devontae Wyatt next to him. I feel pretty good about what Wyatt is as like an okay late first round draft pick. He's a really athletic, pass rushing based defensive tackle. He wasn't a great run defender at Georgia, frankly, and he hasn't been a good run defender in the pros. He's a lighter guy that likes to shoot gaps. You might get some splash plays from him, but he's going to be a splash play pass rusher that on average will probably impact the quarterback twice a game, 3 times a game. Not going to take over games. Probably not someone that's going to demand like a huge contract or anything, but I think they probably extend him here. And as long as all these other guys can step up, I think you're just fine with Devonte Wyatt in that role. After that, you have Carl Brooks, who's kind of a poor man's Devonte Wyatt in many ways. He played edge in college, and he's had some really fun splashes as a third down pass rusher. Undersized for run defense, so you're going to run into some of those same issues as Devonte Wyatt. But as a third piece, very nice. And then they are going to have to rely a lot on these 2 young Georgia D tackles for run defense. That is the core area where you do see that D-line run defense grade as a C+, 21st to 23rd. There's some questions there. There's a chance these guys can fill in nicely. I think they were both good run defending prospects, especially Nazir Stackhouse. I couldn't believe he didn't get drafted. It felt like this draft, teams just way overvalued traits at all these positions. Like Stackhouse doesn't have the traits, but he was a quality run defender on Georgia's defensive line for like the last 3 years. He's got great technique. He's strong. He gets it. He's a plug-and-play backup defensive tackle. The Packers get him undrafted, and he's already ahead of Warren Brinson that I didn't think was as established in that role as Nasir Stackhouse on that same D-line. So Stackhouse is already ahead of Brinson on the depth chart, but both these guys are going to have to play early downs and just do some dirty work. They don't need these guys to pass rush necessarily. You got 3 guys ahead of them to do that. But I would say, yeah, from a run defense standpoint, those guys are wild cards in their own right. And then Colby Wooden, still kind of in his developmental stages. They took dart throws on Wooden and Brooks as kind of college edge players that they wanted to move inside. And to this point in time, Brooks, the later draft pick, has been much better in that role. But yes, there is your polarizing Packers defensive line. Again, they rank 17th, and I think that kind of makes sense. Like, it's hard to say where this is going to land. I think if this team legit wants to be like deep playoff run contenders, this D-line's got to step up. This defense is going to really depend on these guys, and they have the talent to do it. They have the talent to be a top 10 defensive line, in my opinion. I really believe that. But last year, it wasn't there. This could be a bottom 10 unit again. We shall see. But let's go to these linebackers. So not a ton of change this offseason here either. They do say goodbye to Eric Wilson. Stepped in and played half their snaps as a nice veteran piece. But they've got the bodies healthy to fill back in there. And then they did pick up Isaiah Simmons as well. But I said neutral at linebacker. And it is a fun linebacker room. I had major questions about this unit heading into last year, but I feel much better about them with where they sit today. And then their upside is really quite nice. So I have them ranking as the 20th overall linebacker group with C+ grades across the board, 14th to 18th in coverage and 19th to 24th in run defense. So it's a very balanced young duo here, honestly highlighted by Edgerrin Cooper. Quay Walker is going to be the quote-unquote number 1 linebacker because he's probably going to be the green dot and the mic and the quote-unquote number 1, but Edgerrin is already the better linebacker of these two. He showed more in a half season of snaps last year than Quay has shown in his 3 seasons as a starter here. He was a maniac, and if he were to have played the whole season, we'd maybe even feel better about just crowning him as a star top 10 linebacker in the league already. It's still a small sample size for a young linebacker, but literally everything is pointing up on him that he can be one of the rare, actual impact linebackers in the NFL. There's a bunch of solid dudes, but there's probably only 5 to 7 linebackers that you watch a game and say, oh my God, that guy actually changed the game, or you say that consistently about that player. Some guys will have one-off performances like that, but dude, he broke down the run better than I really expected for such a young player that wasn't asked to do a lot of normal linebacker stuff in college. He had really good diagnostics. He got to the ball. He was able to scrape over the top. clean stuff up from the backside, but make plays on the strong side. He was an impactful coverage player where in just a half seasons of snaps, he had 3 passes defended, which might not sound like a lot, but that's on a season. That's about average for a starting linebacker, is to have 3 passes defended. A lot of starters don't even have that many. So to do that in half a season is very good. And then as a pass rusher, we knew he could do that coming out of college, but that translated as well. And part of the Packers being such an efficient blitzing team was in large part thanks to Edgerrin Cooper. I don't have anything negative to say about him other than I'm not going to rank a rookie linebacker who's only played 500 snaps crazy high, but still a 78 overall rating for me. That's a very good spot, and I already consider him, top 15 to top 20 for linebackers. And I think Packers fans finally this year, seeing Edgerrin Cooper actually play well, Packers fans, I think, for the most part, finally realized why I've been saying for the last 3 years, Quay Walker's fine, average to below average, and a complete misuse of a first-round pick when the Packers took him. Now, if you go back to what I said about Quay Walker, where I've spent a lot of time on this channel being very critical about Quay Walker, one of the core things I did say there was eventually he's probably going to be a pretty solid to good player, because that's just the trajectory at this position. Did I agree with spending a first-round pick to then wait 3 years on the guy? No. But I do think the Packers are finally in a position where they might reap the benefits of Quay Walker, who is very physically gifted. He has incrementally developed over the years. His run defense processing has gotten better. His tackling consistency has been very solid the last 2 years and projects as him being a potentially great to elite tackler in the NFL with his physical traits. We have seen him at times be a very effective blitzer as well, and he does have the occasional impressive coverage snap. Now, I don't think Quay Walker is a top 20 linebacker, or that he even will be that this year. I think he's still currently maybe the 45th or 50th best linebacker in the NFL. But I have seen enough developmental signs, knowing how this position does take time, to say, all right, now year 4, we could actually be talking about a starting caliber, top 32 linebacker in the league with some balance to his game. I don't think he's crazy instinctive like Edgerrin Cooper is, but this could actually be a really nice compliment where Quay does have some of that old Blake Martinez where he likes to let stuff come to him a little bit more, the sure tackling, more of the conservative, get everybody lined up, hopefully the IQ now, as he's more of a veteran player, all of that will come together as he's kind of the field general. And then Edgerrin Cooper is your fire stick, or more so stick of dynamite that can really cause chaos. This could be a really freaking top 10 dominant unit here with those skill sets in tandem with each other. Mostly thanks to Edgerrin Cooper. But they still got to go out and make it happen. But I would say the linebackers with Isaiah McDuffie and Eric Wilson under Anthony Campanelli's leadership last year was a very solid to good unit last year, and plenty of reason to believe they can get that and more this year. It was a pleasant surprise last year, and now could really, with these big investments at this position, as you would hope for when you have a first and highly touted second round pick in Cooper, you would expect that group to eventually become a top 10 unit. So I think they're getting there, and we could see that as early as this season. What we also might see is if Quay Walker doesn't take another step, Isaiah McDuffie just takes this job. We are now right up against the start of the season. Quay doesn't have a contract extension yet. They did decline his 5th-year option. That has a decent bit to do with the fact that he hasn't been a superstar for them, but also because, the 5th-year option is a lot, whereas the linebacker market is still very low. So we'll see if they get it done with Quay Walker, or maybe they do just want to see how this goes, how this season goes for Quay. But, when Quay was off the field and it was Isaiah McDuffie out there, you didn't feel a difference. with this Packers linebacker group last year. I think McDuffie is a really good athlete. He's got some instincts. He's got good leadership characteristics as well. He played with Jeff Hafley at Boston College. I think they like McDuffie, and it was really nice that they were able to get him back on the cheap. They signed him for a 2-year, $8 million deal, which is certainly not nothing. And with how he played last year, I was interested too to see if a team like the Bengals or the Raiders or one of these teams, the Cardinals, that really needed some linebacker help, if they might have watched the tape and said, yeah, we'll give him a 2-year, $8 million deal and see if he can carve out a starting job for us on a second contract. I think the Packers legitimately have one of the better, more interesting backup linebackers in the league here, and he's great insurance against Quay Walker. Quay definitely has more physical tools and potential to hopefully show that here in year 4. McDuffie had the extra year on that learning curve ahead of him. But I don't think it's a bad idea for the Packers to say, you know what, let's actually wait on Quay. If he doesn't take a step, we'll let him go. Someone will pay him. We'll get a comp pick, and then McDuffie will be here as a starter on a $4 million deal the next year. That's kind of how I hope they play it, but I also understand if they want to just pay Quay now, anticipate the development before the linebacker market does spike, because I think at some point it's going to spike, and you could probably get Quay for 3 years, $40 million right now. Not great value for what he is now, but if you're projecting development, that could be a good value. Then they did bring in Isaiah Simmons. All right, I like the idea of having that body type in there as an interesting chess piece. The former top 10 pick, though, has been a complete bust, and he's kind of a positionless player, frankly. But maybe he can do some stuff. I don't know. Why not pick him up, I guess? And then Tyrone Hopper, a 3rd-round pick last year, that was one of those classic, where the hell did that one come from, Brian Gutekunst picks, but didn't really play in year 1. We'll see if he gets more playing time as a rotation, I guess. If nothing else, just special teamer. And then they pick up Christian Welch from Iowa by way of the Baltimore Ravens. But yeah, pretty damn solid group of linebackers there with a lot of potential. So with the first 2 levels of this defense, a lot of potential for this to be more of an impact defense. Whereas we go to the secondary, and this is more of a can they just not sink back here, and hopefully the front players can elevate this group more. We'll get into that, but let's look at the offseason changes here. A lot of shakeup at cornerback. Jair Alexander no longer with the team. Jair can still absolutely play, but he only played 31% of their snaps last year. It's hard to call that a big loss when he was mostly unavailable for them last year, but still a moderate loss. Those were 7 games of impactful cornerback play that they don't have from him anymore. And then Eric Stokes was a decent Band-Aid CB3 for them, played 50% of their snaps. Not a huge loss, but they do have to fill those shoes. So they did sign Nate Hobbs, very nice veteran cornerback signing, love that. But beyond that, they didn't really do much in the draft or free agency. They are converting Bo Melton from wide receiver to corner. That's fascinating. And then they spent a 7th-round pick on Micah Robinson. So a lot of pressure on Nate Hobbs and the existing players here to step up. Not a ton of potential in this group, though a little bit from some younger players here. But yeah, I have this as a C-graded secondary, ranking 25th to 29th. I do put the wild card icon on this unit as well, but for a different reason than the other 3 wild card units we had, a QB, wide receiver, and D-line. This is more of a wild card in the sense of downside. I'd be pretty surprised if this was a top 20 secondary this year, but they're a wild card in the sense of they got to avoid being the worst or bottom 3 where they're just getting picked on left and right back here. But let's go through it. You have Nate Hobbs, very nice, balanced veteran signing from the Raiders. He's missed a little time with injury. I don't know if it's quite enough to say he's injury prone, but he's got to stay healthy and available. But when he's out there, I see him as just the kind of ideal number 2 corner. Whether you put him in the slot or on the outside, he does a little bit of everything. I like his man stuff. I think he's okay in press. Good, smart zone corner. He's physical. Love the inside-out flexibility. Love that he played his college ball at Illinois. Anytime the Packers are going for a skill player in free agency, they kind of need the guy to be able to be okay with playing in the cold. So I think it makes sense that Nate Hobbs was the guy that wanted to come here to Green Bay. But yeah, a good signing, good value. Like if you just flipped the Nate Hobbs contract and the Aaron Banks contract, those would make a lot more sense to me. I don't think Nate Hobbs is a $19 million a year corner, probably more like a $15 or $16 million a year corner. Whereas the $11 million that Hobbs got, I think is more close to Aaron Banks and his value. It's a little mental gymnastics on the Packers free agent signings there. But I'm not worried about him. I think he's going to be a very steady player, but we are talking about a number 2 caliber corner that gets slightly banged up at times being your number 1 guy. That's just not a great starting point. And then you got Keyshawn Nixon, who right now it looks like is going to be their starting outside corner. They just love Keyshawn Nixon and his competitiveness. His coverage tape just hasn't been that good. He started every game last year, sometimes in the slot, sometimes on the outside. He was better on the outside than he was in the slot. I'm not calling for a Keyshawn Nixon breakout season, but they survived and were pretty good defensively with him as their outside corner last year. And you're going to be able to get yours against Nixon, but as a Band-Aid option for now, all right, he's okay-ish. Ideally, he'd be like, a backup, a first guy off the bench, like a really quality backup, not necessarily a starter. But that's where I'll bring in Carrington Valentine into this conversation because, taking out Jair Alexander, who, played 30% of snaps last year, he was obviously still great when he played. But outside of Jair, Carrington Valentine, I think, was their best outside corner from a coverage perspective. Year 2 guy out of Kentucky with a lot of traits. You're kind of traits-based SEC, young prospect. Definitely was a steal in the 7th round. I had him as a late 3rd, early 4th round guy in that draft. And whenever he's been out there, his coverage tape has been pretty good. He's not like the highest IQ guy, like the snappiest, stickiest cover player or anything like that, but still getting better in that phase as a young guy. His problem is he cannot tackle and play the run. And I think that drives this team crazy because when he does lose in coverage, he compounds it by, not being in position to get guys on the ground and allowing even more yards off of the loss. So for me, I think they're like, all right, Keyshawn is our outside starter until Carrington Valentine can learn how to tackle. I think Valentine as a dime back is a nice piece. I would love for him to win this job. I think he as well has like good outside, good number 2 outside corner potential. He's the highest potential cornerback in this group. Not writing him off yet. It's got to play more physical, got to play the run. It wasn't just the Dallas Goedert posterizing meme that we saw in the Eagles playoff game either. It was a problem all season long. And the Eagles knew that when they schemed Dallas Goedert up into catching the ball in the flat against Carrington Valentine, where he can drag him 20 yards into the end zone. I think let's just stick with the outside cornerback conversation while we're here in the depth with Valentine. So you got Corey Ballantyne, who's played a little bit for this team, didn't have to play much last year, but he's an emergency backup option. They sort of survived with him in 2023, playing a decent amount. Kalen King, the 7th round pick out of Penn State that was highly perceived out of his sophomore season and then had a really bad junior season, followed up by a really bad Senior Bowl and a really bad workout. So that's kind of the bill on him is like, can we get 2022 Kalen King back? Very unlikely that happens, but he's competing for a spot. Kamal Haddon was a fascinating, late round target out of Tennessee. He's in here competing. The 7th round pick, Micah Robinson. I didn't get to his tape. He wasn't on my radar when I watched Caleb Ransah in that Tulane secondary. So we'll see if they found something there. And then the Bo Melton conversion project is fun. I mean, I could see it. He's still kind of young. He played corner in high school. So, he was recruited as a corner to Rutgers as his brother was. Then he switched to wide receiver. So it's not like he's starting from square one. He's got the ball skills, and it's not unheard of for a wide receiver to make the change to corner and make it work. And he's shown flashes as a wide receiver. So, I don't know. you're not counting on him, but maybe. He's got better chance of impacting this team as a corner than he did as a wide receiver this year. And then there's like 4 other kind of undrafted types trying to get in the mix here. But we do have to talk about their starting nickel corner, and that is Javon Bullard. They are doing the kind of trend that we're seeing around the league where, hey, let's actually take more of a safety and put him at nickel, because if you're gonna live in 2 high structures and, nickel defenses with just 6 men at the line, getting someone that's better at getting off blocks and can actually play the run is very advantageous towards you actually getting into third and pass situations and stopping the run. That was a big deal here. And Javon Bullard does that. He was really impressive against the run, very physical, tackled really well. Just a 10% missed tackle rate is very good. Flew around and contributed to this defense. The coverage stuff, he has so much to learn. And he earlier in the season, he played a lot of deeper safety, and he had coverage busts. They kind of had to put him down in the nickel because he just wasn't seeing the back end very well. But a super athletic 2nd-round pick out of Georgia, very young player. A lot of hope for him to become more of an impactful player for him. And they've kind of got him in the Brian Branch image. He's not Brian Branch. He doesn't have the coverage feel that he has, but the same idea. And it's the same thing we've seen in this defense in Houston, where they took Jalen Petrie, who kind of had those struggles as a back end safety. They put him down in a full-time nickel corner role, and he's thrived in that spot. So plenty of reason to believe Bullard can be a big impact player there, make some plays on the ball, contribute to run defense, be a good blitzer as well. And the coverage stuff should get better from him. I just don't know that he's ever going to be the best, most consistent cover player with what we saw from him in his rookie season. But he is probably the biggest up arrow, if you will, in terms of guys that could really emerge towards helping this secondary, maybe be 20th-ish in the league. If he can take that leap, that'd be awesome. And I do think they'll just kind of keep him there in that spot instead of trying to move him around, which is a tough ask and could have led to a lot of those coverage busts and not being in a good position in coverage. So I think they'll keep him there as long as he's healthy. If he does get hurt, we certainly would see Nixon back in the slot or Hobbs in the slot. Either of those guys can step inside. Just depends how they want to play it. And then Valentine would definitely be an outside corner in that situation. So they are at least insulated for one injury at any spot with that flexibility. But then you go to your safeties, your actual safeties here, and you're kind of saved by Xavier McKinney here. This defense really put a priority on playing top-down coverage, communicating well on the back end, tackling consistently on the back end. That's the definition of Xavier McKinney. And he's so smart that any mistake that the QB makes, he will pair with his extraordinary ball skills and make you pay for it. And we saw that last year with 8 interceptions. Is he likely to repeat that production? No. We know this position fluctuates. He had just 9 interceptions in the 4 seasons before 2024. So that number's going to come down in all likelihood, but that's totally fine. He's going to be in the right place at the right time. He's not this crazy athlete that's got unbelievable range or unbelievable man-to-man cover skills like maybe a Brian Branch does or a Jesse Bates does. But the consistency of his coverage is spectacular. You really just don't see mistakes from him. The last 2 seasons, he's been credited with 0 touchdowns allowed. None of those big plays breaking his defense. He is the definition of the word safety, and only allowed 1 reception into his coverage of more than 25 yards last season. And then just the tackling consistency, it's really hard to beat. It's what you expect from Bama safeties that were coached by Nick Saban, but this has been his just elite trait really since he came into the league. This is what the Packers knew they were getting when they acquired him, and an upgrade from what they had the year before. But yet again, a missed tackle rate of 5.4% is just insane. That was 4th in the league Two of the three guys ahead of him, though, are more box safety roles in Metellus and Elliott. Taylor Rapp was the only guy with even better tackling consistency. But it's really hard when you're playing from some of those deeper alignments to always take the right angles. You've got these crazy athletes out in space. That's where you get a lot of missed tackles. I mean, 10% is like above average for starting safeties on missed tackle rate. And Xavier McKinney has consistently been half that every year of his career. So got to praise him for that. I don't think he's an elite overall run defender in terms of making his presence felt around the box and getting off blocks and all that stuff. But I do think as a cleanup artist, it's hard to find one better than McKinney. And then the other interesting young piece in this secondary, it's really Bullard, Valentine, and Evan Williams here, who as a 4th-round pick last year looked like a diamond in the rough when he was healthy. Now, he got banged up. He's got to stay healthy. Played about half their snaps last year, but he definitely showed much better coverage instincts than Javon Bullard, even though he's not half the athlete of Javon Bullard. And it's just case number 5 trillion that speed is quite overrated at safety. And I even maybe was guilty of that when I did have a late day 3 grade on Evan Williams and didn't really see it when the Packers drafted him in the 4th round. Well, the Packers did. And his ability to step in and understand this defense and take appropriate risks without busting coverages was really impressive for a rookie. Showed off some ball skills, some instincts, and I think on the back end here, in the image of a player that he kind of reminds me of is like a Loie Gilman for the Chargers. Can he be that for this team? Not the most unbelievable athlete, but a smart coverage player with some ball skills and a physical player coming downhill. I like that for Evan Williams, and they like him quite a lot. He's their starting safety right now. And as long as both Bullard and Williams are healthy, I think this is how this projects. Now, if Williams did get hurt, again, you're probably talking about Bullard stepping back out there and going into your cornerback depth, so they've got flexibility in that sense. And then you're going to be vulnerable to some more busted coverages and stuff. But I do like that as depth. And then Zane Anderson is interesting. I know he got hurt in the preseason game. Hopefully nothing crazy, but quietly like a freaky tester out of BYU. And he played well in limited looks last year when Evan Williams did get hurt. So that was kind of the first we've seen of Zane Anderson as an undrafted player out of BYU, but there could be something there just with that testing profile and some of the good tape he put out there last season. And then Keaton Oladapo as well. He was a fun 5th-round pick as kind of a matchup safety. Probably not someone I would imagine getting into the starting mix at any point in time, but for dime packages, if you want a tight end eraser and kind of an instinctive, lurking, intermediate type of defender, would be fun if he could carve out even more of a role last year. He showed some minor flashes on 68 snaps last year. Did end up starting in the Week 18 game against Chicago and graded out well for whatever stock you want to put in a PFF grade in one game at the safety position where grades are very volatile. 74 PFF grade in that game, but still a lot to prove for Oladapo, but was a fun pick. So ultimately, not all hope is lost with this secondary. It's just you can really see why they need that pass rush to be great if you want to expect this defense to be a top 10 unit again. Outside of Xavier McKinney, it's really just adequacy across the board that you're hoping doesn't end up worse than that. With just a couple pieces that have some relatively exciting upside, but nothing too crazy in terms of upside on the secondary compared to the upside of the D-line and linebacker units here. But overall, as we talk about this defense, I don't have them right now ranked back as a top 10 defense. I have them as the 18th overall defense, 21st in pass defense, 19th in run defense. And I think we've covered pretty well the areas of this team where they have the upside to be back to more of a top 10 unit. Certainly think it's possible. They just got to get to work there. But let's talk about the Packers special teams. And they did get some offseason changes with this unit as well with the returners, bringing in Mecole Hardman and Savion Williams. So should be an upgrade to the overall returning ability of this team. But I have the Packers ranking as the 14th overall special teams. We use really all of these quote unquote objective metrics to come out with this special teams formula. So the PFF team grade for this team was 32nd in the league last year, and it didn't feel like this team was all that good on special teams last year, and that's reflected in the PFF team grade. Now, I do think PFF includes playoffs, where the Packers were really bad with that kick return fumble against the Eagles in the playoffs, whereas I don't know if the DVOA special teams grade includes playoffs, because the Packers were 15th for the DVOA team grade. But you average those two out, and it was adequate, but they do at least have the players to feel like they should be able to get the special teams in order this year. Brandon McManus was a godsend of a pickup. That works. He has been PFF's 10th graded kicker over the last 2 years. Daniel Whalen's been a good young punter. He graded out the last 2 years as the 10th overall punter. And then their returners, they already have Keyshawn Nixon, who is explosive in the return game. I don't know that they fully trust him from fumbling, kicks and punts. And that's why they bring in Mecole Hardman, who has been very good on punts in his career, has done some kicks, hasn't had the results there, but still has a lot of speed. And then Savion Williams, honestly, the Cordarrelle Patterson comp is real with him. And Patterson is the best kick returner in NFL history. Again, Bears fans, kick returner, not punt returner. But I see a lot of that in Savion Williams. This dude is special with the ball in his hands, and I think they're going to want to get him going on kicks. So that could be a really nice addition to the special teams. But the Packers seem to shoot themselves in the foot and find ways to be worse than they should on special teams every single year. So while the formula has them as the 14th overall special teams, I'll believe it when I see it. But let's get into our team summary on this team. I don't want to spend too much time here because I think we've done a pretty good job painting some of those critical young parts of this team that could really help this team get over the edge here. But just to recap those wild card pivotal factors, Jordan Love, what is he really in his third season as a starter? I don't know that we have a firm understanding of what he really is at this point in time in his career because of the small sample size, because of the injury last year, because of the tale of two halves first season that he had. But beyond that, his young weapons that he's going to be throwing to, can these guys reach their upside? Can some of these guys get back healthy as well? Guys like Christian Watson, Luke Musgrave, Romeo Doubs, even with some of the concussion stuff. There's just a lot going on with that group of weapons with a ton of upside. I think they got enough pieces to have a good floor there, but they could be a top 10 unit as early as this season. I do believe that. And then the defensive line, big wild card for this team, as we broke down. And then, the secondary just needs to not be horrible. Just don't be a bottom 3, bottom 4 secondary. As long as the defensive line can step up, I think they can be more than fine with the defense. But yeah, strengths. This is kind of why the Packers struggled to beat real playoff caliber teams last year. Outside of running back, which is widely considered alongside maybe linebacker as the least important, least impactful position on a team, this team doesn't have any full position groups that are standout, legitimate strengths. I do think the pass protection itself is a strength of the offensive line, and the unit as a whole is closer to being a strength than a weakness for sure. But run blocking, maybe not quite there for me to put the O-line fully in there as a strength. But other than that, you're talking about the coaching and the culture are the other core strengths of this Packers team. Now, the floor of this team was super high last year. A lot went wrong, and they still were in the playoffs as a 11-win football team. The lack of weaknesses is a big part of that. Right now, the cornerbacks are the only true weakness on this team and this roster. But let's finish up as we do by taking a look at the Packers' schedule, their Vegas odds, and what my win total expectations are for Green Bay. Obviously, the NFC North, the baseline for their schedule is going to be a little bit harder because their division is an absolute gauntlet. And then beyond that, they draw the NFC East and the AFC North, which are very good divisions. So the schedule is pretty tough, certainly harder than they had it last year. Even though they had to play their division last year, they played the AFC South, which was really bad last year, and the NFC West, which certainly wasn't great last year, especially because they got the Rams early when the Rams were bad. So they did have the benefit of an easier schedule last year. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. But by nature of being one of the better teams in the NFC, they are going to be favorited in most of their games. I do like how their road games played out in those two divisions that they matched up against, where I like at Cleveland, at the Giants. I think you'd rather go on the road and win those games and then get your harder opponents like Washington and the Eagles at home as they do. At Dallas is a stadium that Green Bay there's something about that stadium that the Packers just play well there. So that I think is favorable for this team. And then out of the AFC North, we mentioned you get Cleveland and Pittsburgh are probably the two, they are my two lowest ranking teams in the division. That Aaron Rodgers battle is going to be epic in Pittsburgh. But I like forcing Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson to have to come to your house for sure. So there's aspects of this schedule that really play out well for them. What's fun about this Packers team is they don't have a ton of excuses. Like last year, I think, was the excuses season. This, I think, is much more of their shit or get off the pot season. Not that like their window is closed or anything like that if it doesn't go great this year. But I think people would agree with some of that sentiment. We're going to find out real early what this team is made of because you start with two of the top contenders in the NFC in Detroit and Washington in your house at Lambeau. And then you go on the road against two of the better pass rushes in the league, having to face Myles Garrett and Micah Parsons, presumably. Then you got a bye week and then you host Joe Burrow. So especially with those first 2 weeks, the Packers have a chance to come out the gate and make a statement early and kind of announce themselves as contenders in the NFC against those two opponents. Or it could be more of the same, like last year where they struggled to beat those top contenders in the NFC. So very excited to see that from the Packers' perspective. In terms of their Vegas odds and stuff, if they hit this over of 9.5, it just comes down to, how you feel about this team getting better in the areas that they need to get better at. I think the line is spot on by the math here. It's 9.3 was the math projection on this team. Vegas has it at 9.5 wins. So it really just comes down to how you feel about them solving their problems where those areas that they need to get better at. If they can do that and stay healthy, this team should very much go over. No question about that. But the schedule is hard enough that if they don't make progress in some of these areas, yeah, this team could disappoint with an 8 or 9 win season. I don't mind the Super Bowl odds. They are a little bit higher than we have this team ranked. Their Super Bowl odds are 8th to 9th, tied with the Washington Commanders, but 20-1 odds, not bad. I do think this team has Super Bowl upside. There's so much youth. The coaching is so good here that they've earned some benefit of the doubt to develop some of that youth. And I do think, as you reflect on last year, a lot did go wrong for this team, and they still were an 11-win team, even if the members of their division won even more games than that. And then as for the division at plus 240, they are actually ahead of the Vikings in division odds. That surprised me a little bit considering how good the Vikings roster is, another team that has tremendous coaching. But I would say the over and the Super Bowl odds is where I would take my money on this team. Probably staying away from the division because that's so contingent on, a few other teams disappointing as well. Whereas the former are much more in the Packers' control. But that's going to do it for this Packers deep dive. I hope you guys enjoy. You guys will have to let me know what you think of the analysis and the ranking on the Packers here. And who do you think cracks the top 10 now with our next deep dive coming up within the next couple of days. Thank you so much for watching. Please do hit that like button on the way out, and I'll see you soon. Peace out.